In a dimly lit room, a voice called out to Yahello. Alerted, Yahello acknowledged the call, only to be met with the unexpected suggestion that he take over as the merchant group leader. He questioned this, as the speaker, his younger sibling, argued it was Yahello's rightful place as the eldest. The sibling further pressed that Yahello possessed far greater talent for the role, citing his pivotal contributions that elevated their small merchant group to one of the three greatest. Yahello, however, began to stammer an objection, then passionately declared his disinterest in responsibilities, much preferring to lounge about. He complained about the tedious duties of a leader, like attending dinners with business partners and enduring their insincerity, not to mention bearing the brunt of criticism if the group's reputation suffered. He firmly rejected the idea. A moment of silence passed between them, the two figures seated across a low table laden with tea. Yahello let out a sigh of resignation. The elder, perhaps his father, eventually conceded, agreeing to respect Yahello's wishes for now. Yahello's expression turned grim, a precursor to a devastating vision. Suddenly, flames engulfed everything. The life Yahello knew was turning to ash. His lifelong guard lay slain, followed by the tragic sight of his second brother's demise. Esteemed figures like Mr. Jang of the Finance Pavilion, Mr. Lim of the Breeze Pavilion, various generals, the Silver Wind Squad leader, and even the Sunset Pavilion leader were all dead. Yahello, the youngest son of the Yunhee merchant group, sat wounded amidst the carnage, everyone he knew now lifeless before him. Blood trickled from his lips as he surveyed the destruction. The architect of this horror was revealed, Nam Gung Kong, the White Heaven merchant group leader, who now held a gleaming sword to Yahello's throat. Nam Gung Kong mused it was a pity to kill him. Yahello, defiant even in his dire state, questioned the legitimacy of Nam Gung Kang's actions, given his affiliation with the Orthodox Murim Alliance. Nam Gung Kong retorted that the higher-ups had noticed Yunhee's interference in their business, chiding them for overstepping for mere money. Yahello scoffed at the notion of it being just for money, asserting their rivals lost due to lesser skill and finding Nam Gung Kang's justification after such brutality utterly ridiculous. Surprised, Nam Gung Kong uttered a questioning sound. Yahello, channeling his remaining energy, asked if the man had gone deaf, then lunged with a furious cry. The attack was futile. He was struck down, coughing in pain. Nam Gung Kong remarked that he shouldn't have lowered his guard with someone like Yahello, explaining that Yahello's dangerous potential was precisely why the Yunhee merchant group had to be dismantled before raising his sword for the final blow. Horror filled Yahello's eyes. Was all of it for nothing, he wondered? Did the lives of merchants mean so little in the grand scheme of Murim? He lamented not starting martial arts sooner, not expanding their group further, thoughts that perhaps a different path could have averted this tragic end for everyone. Then a voice called him master. Yahello was jolted awake, someone urgently calling, "Young master." An older man acknowledged his poor health, but chided him for sleeping on his first day of work. Confused, Yahello rubbed his eyes, questioning what was happening, wondering if he was still alive. The man reminded him of his assigned task, to review last year's harvest supplies and prepare an analysis. Yahello's vision was blurry, his hearing faint. The man mentioned the merchant group leader's concern for his health, offering bed rest. If he was truly alive, Yahello thought, then this man must be Nam Gung Kong, and he lunged, screaming the name. He missed, stumbling, much to the man's surprise, who then disciplined him with a stick of love, asking if he was still dreaming. A strange, familiar feeling washed over Yahello. This man was not Nam Gung Kong. He recognized him. Chief of Internal Affairs, Yu Soe-kei. Shocked, Yahello blurted out that Yu Soe-kei was long dead, questioning how he could be alive. Panicking, he wondered if he was in hell, while Yu Soe-kei chuckled, asking if he was still not fully awake. Yu Soe-kei commented that in all his years teaching the three young masters, none had ever tried to punch him. Yahello was indeed special. Yahello mumbled an apology, blaming his grogginess. Yu Soe-kei angrily ordered him to his room to face the wall, and Yahello complied, finding himself before the thinking chair. Seated, he vividly recalled his death, confused as to why he was now being scolded by Yusuke. He remembered the harvest supply analysis, his very first task when he began learning the business. The memory of Yusuke's scathing critique surfaced, how he'd said even a wild cow could write a better report, sarcastically thanking him for fertilizer material. A realization began to dawn. He called for Young Am. His personal guard, Yeo Young Am, appeared upside down from above, acknowledging the call. Siaho immediately asked Young Am about his current age. Young Am landed, inquiring if Siaho had been beaten badly before simply asking him to state his age. Young Am informed him that yesterday was his 15th birthday. Siaho's eyes widened. He was 39, not 15. Young Am, observing his odd behavior, suggested a physician, even one specializing in mental health. Siaho examined his hands, smooth, unblemished skin. He wondered if he had truly returned to his younger self. He slapped his own face to test it. Young Am exclaimed in surprise as Siaho confirmed it hurt. Yet, he thought he was supposed to be dead. The brutal memories resurfaced. His family slaughtered, the White Heaven leader's sword piercing his neck. He instinctively clutched his throat. It was all real. He had traveled back to the past, while Young Am looked on bewildered. The massacre, however, was a future that had happened. He clenched his fist, vowing it wouldn't happen again. Young Am, ever the pragmatist, asked if his contorted expression meant he needed a bowel movement. Siaho knew he could recall past events and how to overcome them, planning to use this knowledge to strengthen himself against the Murim Alliance. But then a crucial thought struck him. He asked Young Am to confirm his 15th birthday again. Young Am, exasperated, wondered if puberty had hit. Siaho counted on his fingers, calculating. This was bad. Only a week remained until that incident. He called Young Am again, who responded with weary impatience. Siaho declared they needed to act, secretly. Young Am was puzzled, muttering again about puberty, which Siaho vehemently denied. Elsewhere, a message tube was lit and then extinguished. A figure inquired if a hooded man was certain about his plan, to which the man confidently affirmed. The first figure mentioned that the youngest, Siaho, had started learning the business and had a skilled martial artist as a guard, questioning if the task could be done stealthily. The hooded man scoffed at fearing a sickly child who needed a cane to walk and knew no martial arts. He assured his companion he had a plan for the guard, adding chillingly that any witnesses would be eliminated. The companion laughed, reminding the hooded figure of his past service to their masters. The hooded man, his thoughts on Yunhee's youngest, believed the boy was fated for an early death. A cruel smile played on his lips as he mused the boy might even be grateful if his suffering was cut short, convinced he was awaiting death even as they spoke. Meanwhile, Young Am called out to his young master, who was currently being carried piggyback by a sturdy servant, Young Am walking beside them, questioning their current activity. Siaho, peering through a spyglass, claimed his fragile nature necessitated this exercise, adding they might find something valuable on their outing, much to the carrier's grumbling. Young Am asked what kind of something nice he meant. Siaho pointed towards a cluster of glowing blue fruits on a branch, winking as he identified it as the best miracle medicine in Zhongyuan. A crimson stain spread across the wooden floor, a memory from a past Siaho now relived. His loyal guard, Young Am, pierced by arrows, had implored him to escape the burning compound. Siaho, distraught, had questioned where he could possibly go without her. Young Am, her face bloodied but resolute, insisted it was her duty, her very purpose, urging him to flee, assuring him she was fine. Even if she died there, she had said, it would be enough if her sacrifice was not in vain. Siaho had tried to object, but Young Am reminded him he never listened, even as a child, then fiercely asked if he would render her death worthless, calling him a damn brat. Attackers had then stormed in, shouting orders to get them. A sword had plunged downward as Young Am called his name. She had stood defiant against multiple foes, her last words a plea for him to survive, for she knew he would soar far beyond, asking if he understood. In the snowy present, Young Am, very much alive, asked what he was looking at. Beside her, Gap, his servant, shivered violently, complaining about the bitter cold. Siaho explained to his two most trusted companions that he sought a miracle medicine, one fated to cause a bloodbath in the future, while Young M grumbled about the freezing weather. Gap, still shivering, inquired about their specific quarry. Siaho pointed towards a distant, snow-dusted tree, upon which grew the pure, icy snow plum, a potent medicine of energy, comparable to 10,000 years snow ginseng. Young Am, peering through her fingers, asked what it was, and Siaho replied it was a cure for his condition. She expressed concern about using an unknown remedy, reminding him of the ample medicines they already possessed at home. Siaho, however, dismissed them, stating his ailment was no mere meridian collapse. It was the mysterious dragon star physique, a unique condition of extremely strong innate energy. While women could naturally handle such power, for men, this energy clashed with their yang, leading to a slow death. The only solution, he knew, was to consume an rich miracle medicine during adolescence, converting the body's yang to yin. He lamented learning this too late in his previous life, when the plum was impossible to obtain. As Gap let out a sneeze, Young Am pressed Siaho for a proper explanation, but he simply apologized, asking them to trust him this once. He pleaded with them, and Young Am sighed, exasperatedly wondering who he took after, given his perpetual disregard for his guardian's advice. Promising to be quick, she then leaped towards the tree, calling for Gap to follow. Siaho watched her, silently vowing to become as strong as he possibly could, even if not stronger than her. As Young Am struggled to reach the high-hanging fruit, visibly annoyed, Siaho fervently hoped she wouldn't die for his sake. A few days later, back at the estate, servants greeted the young master as he emerged, and he returned their good morning cheerily. Young Am and Gap, however, looked worse for wear, with Young M muttering that they'd been down with colds for days because of him. Chief Yu Soeke approached, calling out to guard Yeo, and then remarked on the young master's recent change, noting a new spring in his step as Siaho hummed, walking with his cane. Gap chimed in that Siaho seemed taller, and Yu Soeke agreed, recalling he used to be smaller. A young maid then excitedly pointed out that his face had changed too, swooning over how he'd gone from pretty to devastatingly handsome. Yusoke observed that Siaho now spoke like an old man, while Young M, despite internally finding it cute, looked on with a silent, simmering irritation. The maid gushed that he was practically an adult now, prompting Young M to curtly dismiss them back to their duties, chiding them for their casual talk. Indeed, Siaho had taken the miracle medicine, undergoing a body reconstruction while meditating, a surge of power transforming him, his eyes now holding a new, vibrant glow. He subtly gestured to Young Am and Gap, reminding them to keep his changes secret. Young Am sighed, frustrated by his secrecy, though Gap simply expressed relief as long as he was healthy. Young Am, however, grumbled that if he got sick again, she'd personally unalive him. Later, at the finance pavilion, Rank 7 member Yeo Chung-Yui stared in disbelief at the mountain of documents before him, stammering how Siaho could have processed it all in a mere 2 hours. This task, Yeo Chung-Yui fretted, should have taken at least 2 days, making him question the thoroughness of Siaho's work. Siaho, with a slight smile, explained it was merely summary writing, not composing from scratch, thus not overly difficult for him, now on his nth day of work. Internally, Siaho berated himself for not feigning incompetence better, his past life's experience and improved physique having accelerated his work far too much. Yeo Chung-Yui, addressing the young master, stressed the importance of meticulousness even with minor tasks in the finance pavilion, comparing finances to lifeblood and warning of the dire consequences of leaks. Siaho, feigning innocence, asked if Yeo Chung-Yui was implying he'd been hasty. Yeo Chung-Yui confirmed he had been far too quick, his mind replaying Siaho's recent transgressions, falling asleep, and even punching the chief of internal affairs, making it impossible for him to believe the work was done well. Siaho, understanding Yeo Chang-yui's unspoken doubts, proposed a wager. He would take the documents to the unmarried Chief of Internal Affairs, Yu So-ak, betting on whether they would pass inspection. Yeo Chang-yui, amused, warned that the chief would surely find fault, but Siaho confidently replied, "We'll see." Thinking Siaho's arrogance needed a lesson, Yeo Chang-yui agreed, asking for the stakes. The loser, Siaho declared, would handle all remaining documents for the day, to which Yeo Chang-yui readily consented during his eldest brother's upcoming announcement ceremony. Siaho then added with a smirk that the loser must also perform the 02 dance, a supposedly traditional Han Dynasty dance. Yeo Chang-yui was momentarily stunned, questioning if the brat was serious, before vehemently accepting the challenge, both vowing no backing down. A junior member, Ah Sung, nervously tried to intervene, suggesting they were overly heated, only to be told not to interrupt, and he retreated, muttering about being the senior. Siaho urged they go immediately, and Yeo Chang-yui agreed. Before Chief Yu So-ak, who held the presented scroll, the chief marveled, asking if the young master had truly accomplished this alone, work most pavilion leaders would find daunting. Yeo Chang-yui's glasses seemed to crack from shock. He desperately urged the chief to re-examine, certain of a mistake, but the chief sternly asked if he was being questioned. Yeo Chang-yui then lamented loudly that in all his years, the chief had never once approved his work so readily, only to be whacked by the chief's stick, who berated him for being outdone by a novice and questioned if his spectacles were merely for show. Siaho mused that Yeo Chang-yui wasn't unskilled. Chief Yu's standards were just astronomically high, like demanding a unicorn for a pony ride. Tapping his shoulder, Siaho cheekily told a dejected Yeo Chang-yui he looked forward to his 02 dance and promptly departed, leaving Yeo Chang-yui sputtering in his wake. Siaho walked away, feeling refreshed and confident. His good mood was noted by his second brother, Jinho, who harshly criticized him for causing their parents and eldest brother worry with his health, calling him a bastard. A flicker of a painful memory crossed Siaho's mind, and his expression shifted as he addressed Jinho by name, causing his brother to flinch. Jinho aggressively questioned the sudden friendliness, reminding Siaho of their previously strained relationship. Jinho admitted he too had opposed Siaho learning the business, fearing it would worsen his health and further burden their father. Siaho silently conceded Jinho had a point. Jinho then sternly warned him not to flaunt his sickness before their father, threatening to kill him if he collapsed again as he had before. Siaho calmly assured him he would be careful. Jinho bluntly stated his dislike for him before Siaho turned and walked towards the main doors with his cane, reflecting that this was his first meeting with his father and brothers since returning to the past, his cane tapping rhythmically. A smile touched his lips. There was indeed a lot he intended to show them. A chilling memory gripped Siaho. His past life whispered of a devastating fire that would engulf the finance pavilion in days. A low-ranking official on duty would perish, and crucial documents would turn to ash, causing immense loss. The cause, he recalled, was a small, deliberately placed incendiary device. It was a meticulously planned arson. Back in the present, Yeo Chang-yui pored over documents, his brow furrowed in concentration. Siaho, leaning on his cane, knew that to prevent this future tragedy, he needed the freedom to act, which meant he couldn't be perceived as the sickly young master gone. Noticing Yeo Chang-yui's perplexed stare, Siaho casually asked if something was amiss before dismissing it and heading towards his father's quarters. To gain that freedom, he mused, he first had to fundamentally change how everyone saw him. Within the Uni Merchant Group's main estate, the clinking of cutlery filled the dining hall, where Siaho sat with his father and two older brothers. Jiango, the first son, inquired about Jinho's work at the Sunset Pavilion, remarking on its difference from the Breeze Pavilion. Jinho, the second son, sipped his drink, replying that fieldwork suited him better as it was less mentally taxing and more physical. Siaho remained quiet. Jiango then turned to him, asking about his practical training at the finance pavilion, which Xiaoho confirmed. Jiango advised him to learn well, but not to rush, expressing concern that he might overexert himself. Xiaoho assured him he was working within his limits, privately recalling his eldest brother's consistent, perhaps overly cautious, nature. He was determined not to witness the sorrowful side of Jiango that he remembered from his past, his gaze firm. Jinho scoffed at Xiaoho's assurance, sarcastically questioning if anything beyond resting and eating wasn't considered overdoing it for him. Jiango admonished Jinho for his disrespectful tone, while Xiaoho internally labeled Jinho completely twisted. Jinho retorted that Jiango's constant coddling was why Xiaoho didn't know his place, questioning how long they had to expend effort on him, calling him a burden to the household, which prompted an indignant outburst from Jiango. Jinho continued, pointing out Xiaoho's frailty, coughing blood and needing a cane, and questioned what role he could possibly fill. The word stung Xiaoho, even now. Deciding to address the matter himself, Xiaoho called out to Jinho, startling him. As Jinho began to object to the informal address, Xiaoho cut him off, suggesting they cease their bickering as their father was about to arrive, and it wouldn't do for him to witness such a pathetic display. He also advised Jiango to calm himself, and Jiango conceded he had become too agitated. Jiango found himself pondering his youngest brother's demeanor. While always sharp, today Xiaoho seemed uncharacteristically mature. Just then, a servant announced the master's arrival. Xiaoho tensed slightly, his eyes widening for a moment as their father entered. Gilsang, the head of the Yunhe merchant group, apologized for his tardiness, and his sons greeted him, Jiango assuring him it was fine. Gilsang immediately noticed Xiaoho's flushed face, asking if he was unwell. Xiaoho, flustered, denied it. The redness, he knew, stemmed from the vivid memory of his father's death in his past life, a stark image now superimposed on his father's youthful presence. Gilsang, perceiving his son's turmoil, gently asked if he had something to say. Xiaoho chided himself internally for the emotional display. It wasn't like him, reminding himself that tragic event hadn't occurred in this timeline, and his focus should be solely on protecting the merchant group. He took a calming breath. Composed, Xiaoho admitted his father had seen through him and confirmed he did have something to discuss. Gilsang looked intrigued, Jiango curious. His father invited him to sit and speak. Xiaoho began by asking if his father recalled their conversation before he started at the finance pavilion, which Gilsang affirmed. Gilsang reiterated that due to Xiaoho's frailty, his training had been limited to an overview rather than full responsibilities. Xiaoho then questioned if this was truly sufficient, arguing that he too would eventually need to lead pavilion members. Jinho paused his meal, surprised by Xiaoho's sudden assertiveness. Gilsang acknowledged the validity of his point and asked Xiaoho to be direct. Xiaoho stated his desire to take on all duties, including night shifts, just like his brothers and other members. His father's refusal was immediate and firm. Xiaoho fell silent, Jinho observing the exchange. Xiaoho questioned if the rejection wasn't a bit harsh, but his father maintained that what couldn't be done simply couldn't. He elaborated that night duty, involving all-night vigilance and security management, was absolutely impossible for Xiaoho in his current state. Any other duty was permissible, but not night duty. That was final. This wouldn't do, Xiaoho resolved internally. To prevent the fire, he absolutely had to be on night duty on the day of the incident. He then asked if his father would reconsider if he could prove his physical capability for such a task. Gilsang conceded he would, naturally, but inquired how Xiaoho intended to provide such proof. Xiaoho declared he would spar with Jinho, a statement that shocked his second brother to the core. Jiango, equally surprised, asked what Xiaoho had just proposed. Gilsang, too, was momentarily speechless. Jinho's eyes narrowed in disbelief. He demanded if Xiaoho had lost his mind. Xiaoho, with a calm smile, merely asked what was wrong, adding a playful taunt. "Afraid I'll win." Jiango interjected, questioning Xiaoho's words, but Siaho simply asked if there was an issue. He explained that since both his father and Jiango were concerned for his health, alleviating that worry would be an act of filial piety. Knowing Jinho had recently become a first-class martial artist, Siaho proposed that holding his own against him would surely prove his capability to handle all duties at the finance pavilion. Jinho, turning to his father, clenched his fist and, after a moment, admitted Siaho's logic made sense, requesting permission for the spar. Jiango began to protest on Jinho's behalf, but Gilsing cut him off, granting permission. When Jiango expressed his shock, Gilsing simply stated that Siaho needed to learn to take responsibility for his words. As he picked at his food, he added that everyone must face trials sooner or later, and it seemed Siaho's time had come. Siaho understood Jinho's confidence. It was to be expected. Gilsing then laid out the terms. Considering the significant skill gap, if Siaho could endure against Jinho for a mere 1.5 minutes, he would be granted permission to take on all duties, including night shifts. He asked if Siaho could manage that. Siaho respectfully thanked his father for the opportunity. Jiango sighed, his head in his hand, advising Siaho to surrender if the spar became too dangerous, assuring him there was no shame in it. Siaho acknowledged the advice, but added with a knowing smile that he honestly didn't believe surrender would be necessary. Jinho's eyes blazed with a fierce, competitive light. The scene shifted to the training grounds, where Siaho and Jinho faced each other. Young Am and Palgap stood by a large drum, holding drumsticks, looking utterly bewildered. Young Am exclaimed in disbelief, wondering how the young master, who could barely stand for long just recently, was now on a sparring stage, even as Siaho gave her a casual wave. Siaho put a finger to his lips, silently requesting her discretion. Palgap attempted to reassure Young Am, saying he would be fine, but Young Am muttered that he had to be fine. Jiango, standing beside his father, asked if he wasn't worried. Gilsing calmly replied that there was nothing to be concerned about. Jiango expressed his fear that Jinho, having always openly looked down on Siaho, might not hold back. Gilsing repeated the phrase "looked down on him" thoughtfully, then simply stated they would watch and see for now, as Siaho stood composed opposite of visibly incensed Jinho. Young Am and Palgap watched, dumbfounded by the sudden duel between the youngest and second young masters, with Palgap declaring the entire family had clearly lost their minds. Young Am fumed internally about Siaho's audacity, acting all sexy and inconsiderate, wondering if he was possessed. Their father, Gilsing, ordered them to sound the drum, and Palgap stammered in surprise. Gilsing repeated the command with stern finality. Young Am, bewildered but resigned, struck the drum with fervor, hoping the youngest master would somehow win. Jinho, gripping his sword, addressed Siaho as a bastard who didn't know his place. He accused Siaho of being spoiled by love, thinking the world was beneath him due to his privileged upbringing. Jinho, his eyes burning with determination, declared that as his older brother, he would teach Siaho the ways of the world, leaping into an attack. From a balcony, a young Jinho observed his infant brother with fascination, his mother remarking on his captivated gaze. He tentatively reached out his hand, exclaiming at how small Siaho was when their hands touched. His father, placing a hand on young Jinho's head, told him he must take good care of his brother in the future, reminding him of his role as the elder sibling, as baby Siaho lay looking up. Back on the training ground, he accused their father of always expecting him and Jiango to act as older brothers while overlooking Jinho's own failings as a son. Jinho, his attack blocked, declared he could not accept that. Siaho, with a sigh, wondered what level he should engage with, then executed the 12th form Snow Dragon Sword technique in traceless steps, a flurry of motion that left Jinho stunned. Jinho, caught off guard, could only utter a confused "huh?" Jiango and Gilsing watched in disbelief, while Young Am and Palgap's jaws dropped. Siaho stumbled, feigning clumsiness, exclaiming "ouch" as he fell. He then explained with a sheepish grin that he'd been learning martial arts from a book, and since his body was improving, he tried a step technique for the first time, luckily dodging but tripping in the process, all while subtly using his entire being to feign incompetence. Jinho, seething, wondered if the damn bastard was joking. Jinho renewed his assault, a series of rapid strikes, but Xiaoho deflected each one, the force of their blows creating shockwaves. Jiango, astounded, questioned how Xiaoho, that child, could manage this. Gilsang advised Jinho not to take Xiaoho's words lightly, asserting that Xiaoho wouldn't have proposed a duel without careful consideration, because Xiaoho was, in fact, the greatest genius in the history of the Yunhe merchant group. Gilsang mused that although he'd said it, he hadn't expected Xiaoho to be this good, acknowledging that even if Jinho wasn't at full force, it was still impressive. Xiaoho, who previously couldn't even maintain his balance, was holding his own against a first-rate master. Gilsang pondered that with proper tutelage, Xiaoho's growth would be immense. However, his current worry wasn't Xiaoho, but Jinho, who was visibly struggling, repeatedly asking why. "Why aren't my blows landing?" Jinho screamed internally, his frustration mounting. He recalled hearing Xiaoho was the group's greatest genius, and now wondered if Xiaoho intended to steal that title from him as well. A memory surfaced. A young Jinho peeking around a corner, calling out to Xiaoho that the adults were gone, only to find Xiaoho coughing up blood, weak and vulnerable. Jinho had watched in horrified shock. Another memory. Their father informing Jinho that the chief of external affairs would now teach him martial arts. Young Jinho had protested, wanting to learn from his father, but Gilsang had explained Xiaoho's severe illness required his attention, and Jinho needed to concede, reminding him he was an older brother now. Then, the dire news. Young Master Xiaoho was in critical condition. Jinho, kneeling by his brother's bedside, had heard the urgent calls to stop the bleeding and the frantic questions about the cause. Overcome with guilt and tears, a servant had explained that the second young master seemed to have accidentally fed Xiaoho an elixir of yang energy. Jinho had tearfully confessed to his father he just wanted Xiaoho to get better faster, but his father had forcefully pulled him away, his expression unreadable to the distraught child. Later, overhearing a conversation about Xiaoho's grim prognosis, the severe internal injuries he would suffer even if he recovered. Back in the duel, Jinho's attacks became more frenzied. He raged internally that all their problems stemmed from Xiaoho being born weak. "So why do I?" he yelled. Xiaoho simply addressed him as brother, then remarked that family is quite difficult, much to Jinho's confused anger. Xiaoho continued, musing that because it's the closest relationship, they must carry deep-seated bad blood while spending their lives together. Jinho, baffled, asked what. Xiaoho, parrying another blow, claimed it was something he'd heard once, to which Jinho angrily retorted he wasn't curious. Jiango anxiously asked Young Yam how much time was left, and she, holding an hourglass, announced around 9 seconds. Jinho, his sword glowing with power, declared that seeing Xiaoho spout such bullshit meant this must be easy for him, but that would no longer be the case. Gilsing shouted at Jinho, telling him to put his feelings aside, then roared his full name as Jinho launched a powerful, glowing strike. Xiaoho, calmly meeting the attack, remarked that Jinho didn't know anything at all. A voice, perhaps Jinho's own past self, echoed that family is difficult, that being so close means carrying bad blood forever. It continued that living with such thoughts makes one forget the initial reasons for hatred, and that Jinho's hatred for Xiaoho was like that. The powerlessness of being unable to help, the guilt and alienation because the family always prioritized Xiaoho, all transforming into hatred. A vision of Jinho, wounded and dying, appeared, stating it wasn't Xiaoho's fault, apologizing for his feelings, and offering this as a long-postponed apology, a bloodied hand releasing a small, crafted bird. A white dove took flight as Jinho, in his final moments, uttered Xiaoho's name, telling him not to forgive him before being struck down by an enemy's blade. "I can't do that, brother," Xiaoho stated in the present, his cane meeting Jinho's glowing sword. "How is that solely your fault?" He declared they were all immature as their canes shattered. The onlookers were stunned. Jinho, disarmed, wondered if Siaho had let go of his sword. A slight smile played on Siaho's lips. He pointed out that while Jinho added sword chi, the attack was fundamentally the same as his first, making it obvious. Jinho clenched his fist, realizing he couldn't just forgive Siaho, but decided to let it go with a final, unarmed strike, which Siaho easily caught. Jinho stared at his fist in disbelief. Young Am, equally shocked, dropped the hourglass. She announced that time was up, and since there was no victory within the allotted 10 minutes, the bet resulted in the youngest master's victory. Siaho extended his hand, a clear winner. Later, at the finance pavilion, Chief Yu Soeke asked Yeo Chang-Ui if the youngest master had indeed won. Yeo Chang-Ui confirmed it, adding it was a public secret that Yu Soeke probably already knew, or perhaps he was just bad at keeping secrets. Yu Soeke chuckled, marveling at Siaho's organized materials, calling him quite the steal. A devious glint in his eye, Yu Soeke declared he must recommend Siaho as his assistant and work him 24 hours a day. In the aftermath of the spar, Jinho practiced his swordsmanship alone, his movements fluid and precise, his gaze intense. Memories of Siaho's past frailty, coughing blood, weak and bedridden, flashed through his mind, contrasting sharply with the brother who had just faced him. He recalled the hushed concern of the adults around Siaho's sickbed. Siaho's words during the duel echoed, "Family really is difficult." Jinho let out a frustrated sigh, then hurled his swords to the ground with a clang. He declared himself pissed, yet, confusingly, also strangely relieved. He spotted a maid and asked her about Siaho's whereabouts, and she nervously replied that the youngest master had been dragged away by the chief of internal affairs. Jinho questioned why the chief would do such a thing. Meanwhile, Siaho found himself standing somewhat awkwardly before Chief Yusa, with a sinister glint in his eyes and hands clasped, addressed him with feigned joviality, noting that word was out about Siaho finally taking on real duties. Siaho cautiously confirmed this was technically true, sensing something amiss. At Yu Soeke's command to bring him in, Zhou Young, Yu Soeke's assistant, unceremoniously dragged a retching Yeo Chang-Ui into the room. Yu Soeke then informed Siaho that, from this day forward, he was his assistant, an appointment approved by the Yunhee merchant group head, making resistance futile. Siaho, gagged, recalled that in his past life, Yu Soeke had died from overwork. The chief, with a menacing grin, began to list Siaho's extensive duties, from managing finances and taxes to verifying loan documents and handling budgets, all while asking if it sounded simple enough. Siaho's eyes widened in horror. Zhou Young, Yu Soeke's assistant, gently tried to reassure the gagged Siaho not to worry too much, adding with a dreamy expression that, just like her, he'd soon start to enjoy it, because who doesn't love being buried under a mountain of paperwork with a boss who thinks sleep is for the weak? Siaho, having managed to get his gag off and block Young's acupoints, rendering her unconscious, stated he didn't think that would happen, prompting Yu Soeke to ask why. Siaho stammered, internally acknowledging he couldn't reveal his knowledge of the impending finance pavilion fire. He knew the incident occurred between 3 and 5 a.m., and to prevent it, he needed to be on overnight duty. But if he was forced into this assistant role, he'd be lucky to leave the office before midnight, let alone stand guard. He remembered seeing Yu Soeke's previous assistant scream and flee from overwork. He couldn't guarantee he wouldn't suffer the same fate. Anything but that, he thought with dread. Addressing Yu Soeke, Siaho argued that the true value of his field training lay in gaining a broad understanding of operations, not in the minutiae of one department, especially since he'd only just begun his training 2 days prior, gesturing to the still unconscious Young. Surely, he suggested, more qualified candidates existed for the assistant role. He wished to learn the regular duties of other staff, not receive special treatment like being Young's personal, "Hey, if you sleep here your mouth will stay crooked" alarm clock. He also pointed out he'd heard the chief's assistant wasn't assigned overnight shifts, a duty he considered the heart of administrative work, where all hardships were concentrated. Yusoake, stroking his chin, conceded he understood the young master's intention, and Siaho thanked him, thinking he'd succeeded. However, Yusoake then declared with a wide, terrifying grin that Siaho would handle both regular and overnight duties, along with all other expenditures. Siaho froze in stunned silence. Suddenly, he bolted, and a cry went up that the young master was escaping. He was quickly apprehended by the armed forces of the Uni Merchant Group, the Silver Wind Squad, whose tasks included protecting the group, guard duties, and, apparently, detaining escaping employees. 3 days later, the roster for overnight duty staff listed Yeo, Changyui, and Siaho. Today was the day Siaho thought, the day of the Finance Pavilion fire incident. He recalled that Yeo Changyui had been on duty the night of the fire in his past life. He was glad he remembered that detail. The only problem was his overwhelming desire for sleep. He felt like he was breaking his own limits daily, marveling that a human could work so hard, sustained only by warmth pills, the Uni Merchant's stimulant of choice. Thanks to the inner energy from the pure, icy snow plum, he recovered quickly with meditation and breathing exercises, but he suspected this only encouraged them to pile more work on him. He vowed to escape this madhouse once the incident was over, before he ended up like the crazy woman, Jo Young, who was now ecstatically begging for more work, much to the horror of a nearby, overworked soul. Siaho approached Yeo Changyui, reminding him he was counting on him for the overnight shift. Yeo Changyui replied he was counting on Siaho too, then paused, saying before that. Siaho, seated at his desk, knew he just needed to get through tonight safely. His eyes snapped open with a sudden realization. Yeo Changyui suggested they have some tea before starting. Siaho, declining, said he was fine. They worked in silence for a while. Yeo Changyui then broke the quiet, asking Siaho if he didn't have anything to say to him. Siaho, feigning ignorance, asked what he meant, his eyes unreadable. Yeo Changyui pressed if that was so, and Siaho confirmed it. After a tense moment, Yeo Changyui announced he was going to do his rounds, alone, much to Siaho's surprise. Yeo Changyui stated he thought it best. Geez, Siaho muttered as the man departed. Siaho called for Young Am, wondering if she was asleep. She appeared from the rafters, stating she'd been there earlier, and when Siaho questioned her odd hiding places, she simply replied it was a habit, more comfortable there. Siaho invited her down for tea, and she, intrigued by the occasion, readily accepted. She took a sip, remarking it was a bit bitter, while Siaho chided her for letting it boil too long. As expected, the tea contained sleeping medicine, and Young Am promptly slumped over, snoring. Siaho stretched, wishing he could pass out too, then covered the sleeping Young Am with a blanket. It was time, he declared, to begin his patrol. He picked up a bucket of water, a determined look on his face. It was time to catch the arsonist as he walked through the darkened halls of the Finance Pavilion. Inside the dimly lit Finance Pavilion, a hooded figure moved with furtive purpose, scattering a suspicious powder. A wooden bucket soon followed, crashing against the floorboards. The figure then produced a small, cylindrical fire starter, a tiny flame erupting from its tip with a soft whoosh. A sinister grin spread across the arsonist's face. Suddenly, a voice from behind remarked on the arsonist's apparent excitement. The hooded man whirled around, startled, only to see young Master Siaho advancing calmly. Siaho plucked the lit fire starter from the man's grasp, noting how well it burned, almost like adding oil to an existing flame. He coolly observed that the man had prepared quite thoroughly, addressing him as Pavilion member Ah-sung. Ah-sung, his face a mask of disbelief, demanded to know how Siaho had figured it out. Siaho offered a playful, almost taunting question, wondering if Ah-sung would believe him if he claimed to have seen it from the future. Ah-sung, recovering slightly, retorted that Siaho clearly had no intention of telling him the truth, to which Siaho countered by asking if that was what truly mattered at that moment. The critical point Siaho emphasized was that Ah-sung had been caught attempting arson. Ah-sung let out a grunt, a wry chuckle escaping him as he conceded that Siaho was not wrong. He pulled back his hood, acknowledging that the rumors of the young master's keenness were, it seemed, not exaggerated. Then, his demeanor shifted, a glint of steel appearing as he produced a knife and questioned if Siaho was alone. Siaho, momentarily surprised, quipped with a charmingly awkward hand gesture that, well, yes, he was still single, much to the arsonist's evident irritation. Ah Sung's eye twitched. Enraged by the flippancy, he lunged, yelling for Siaho to die. Meanwhile, Yeo Chong-Ui patrolled the corridors, lantern in hand, lost in thought. His mind kept replaying recent interactions with young Master Siaho. He recalled Siaho asking if he had anything to say, and his own feigned ignorance, a decision he now pondered. Yeo Chong-Ui had been utterly baffled, asking Siaho directly how he had managed such a feat, getting documents approved by the notoriously strict chief of internal affairs on his mere second day of training, a task Yeo Chong-Ui himself hadn't accomplished in 3 years. He had even asked what sorcery Siaho employed. Siaho had then teased him about his stiffness, which Yeo Chong-Ui had vehemently, if unconvincingly, denied. Siaho had humbly stated there was nothing special about him, explaining he simply tried to understand the chief's intentions beyond the mere tasks, warning that focusing only on formality led to pointless work. He'd even joked about sounding like an old man, attributing the wisdom to his father. The conversation had left Yeo Chong-Ui feeling both frustrated and humbled. Siaho had then wisely advised that such emotions could fuel growth, another lesson from his father, which brought a small smile to Yeo Chong-Ui's face at the memory. He remembered announcing his rounds, and Siaho asking if he was going alone, to which Yeo Chong-Ui had affirmed, thinking it best. Back in the present, Yeo Chong-Ui mused that for a rookie, the merchant group head son had certainly caught them off guard. Perhaps the group's future did lie with him. Even if, he admitted with a grimace, Siaho could be incredibly annoying at times, like when he'd asked if Yeo Chong-Ui was practicing the Void Twin dance well. Deciding he needed a moment, Yeo Chong-Ui headed towards the break room, marked as the tonic room. A warm cup of tea seemed ideal, he thought, regretting his pride for not accepting the tea Siaho had offered earlier. As he reached for a tea jar, he paused. He noticed peculiar oil stains on it that hadn't been there before. Just as this realization dawned, a swift motion cut through the air in the finance pavilion. Ah Sung found his attacks effortlessly parried by Siaho. The young master mused that after his spar with Jinho, fighting Ah Sung felt significantly easier as he unleashed the 12th form Snow Dragon Fist Strike technique subform, a swift bamboo strike connecting solidly. Ah Sung reeled back, utterly bewildered. He couldn't comprehend it. Wasn't Siaho supposed to be chronically ill, on the verge of death at any moment? Blow after blow landed, and Ah Sung, thoroughly pummeled, wondered if this was all a dream, lying defeated and bleeding on the floor. This couldn't be real, he thought, his hand trembling as a memory of mahjong tiles surfaced. His mind flashed back to his past, the despair of a dead-end job and a meaningless life, deciding to bet everything on a single mahjong tile. He remembered the rage and accusations of scams as he lost heavily at the gambling den, confronting a burly man he accused of tampering with the tiles, only to be unceremoniously thrown out. Lying in the dirt, he had despaired, his life feeling as fleeting and empty as that one tile. It was then a shadowy figure had approached him in his pathetic state. Ah Sung had begged, promising to repay his debts, leveraging his position within the Yunhee merchant group. The figure had acknowledged his capabilities and proposed they work together again. Back in the present, the fight knocked out of him. Ah Sung felt the pointlessness of it all wash over him. But Siaho wasn't finished, informing him that no one had given him permission to faint. A sharp, precise blow landed on Ah Sung's jaw. Siaho stood over the coughing, defeated man, his voice cold as he declared that from now on, Ah Sung was not human anymore. With an eerie calm, Siaho explained that whenever he was struck, he would only speak the truth. He leaned closer, demanding to know if Ah Sung understood. The terrified arsonist could only stare back as Yahello commanded him to answer. Under the pre-dawn sky, around 4 to 5 a.m., the Yunhee Merchant Group's main building was illuminated. Yahello addressed the assembled pavilion leaders, apologizing for the early morning ruckus but assuring them he had his reasons. He stated he was sure they had received the message, but reiterated that they had just caught the man attempting to set the finance pavilion on fire, confirming it was orchestrated by the Lotus Courtesan House, with the culprit, Ah-sung, currently hanging from a tree. Yahello casually mentioned that the Breeze Pavilion leader's water wheel had been quite effective in extracting a full confession from the now whimpering arsonist, who was begging for death. Ah-sung, identified as a Finance Pavilion Rank 9 member, looked utterly broken. Yahello's father, Un Gilsang, questioned the certainty of the Lotus Courtesan House's involvement, his expression stern. Yahello inwardly acknowledged that his father must feel deeply betrayed, considering the Lotus Courtesan House was one of Hubei's 5 greatest escort pavilions and a longtime partner. Breeze Pavilion leader Jeek Byonkiol, smoking his pipe, recalled the large outstanding sum they owed, speculating their motive was to erase debt records by fire. Sunset Pavilion leader Yun Dami concurred, noting how difficult it would have been to identify the culprit had they succeeded, as many places were indebted to them. Chief of External Affairs and Silver Wind Squad leader Go Il-pyong expressed his relief. He praised the young master, acknowledging that without him, they would all have been asleep, blissfully unaware of the fire. Yahello, however, felt a chill, knowing the truth. Yeo Chongyui would have burned to death, and young Am was only safe because he had drugged her tea. He modestly stated that was enough praise and suggested they discuss what to do next, a suggestion Go Il-pyong quickly agreed to. The leaders were impressed. One noted that someone so young would typically want to show off more, while another observed his calm decisiveness despite the gravity of the incident. They all agreed. He was definitely talented. Chief of Internal Affairs Yu Soake hesitantly raised a hand, requesting Ah-sung be taken down from the tree, stating he didn't feel good seeing a human treated that way. Yahello was inwardly surprised by this unexpected sentiment from the chief. Once Ah-sung was on the ground and weakly thanked the chief, Yu Soake exploded with rage, declaring that if Ah-sung was awake, he was ready for a beating. He furiously pummeled the unfortunate arsonist, yelling about working late and being woken early by this little. Well, let's just say it wasn't a term of endearment. The other leaders quickly tried to usher Yahello inside, urging him to pretend he didn't see the chief's meltdown. Inside, Yahello calmly made a shocking proposal. They should actually set the finance pavilion on fire. The assembled leaders stared in stunned silence, their faces a collective surprise Pikachu face meme. Chief Yusoake was the first to find his voice, sputtering in outrage. But Go Il-pyong urged him to calm down and listen, reminding him this was his place of business. Yahello's plan, one leader eventually conceded, was impressive. Pavilion leader Yun Dami, sipping her tea, mused if Yahello was referencing the quote about lies disturbing truth and fakes disturbing reality. Yahello confirmed that was indeed the saying. He explained to Yun Dami that they needed to cover up the truth with a lie. They had to make the Lotus Courtesan House believe their arson plan was a success, which would, in turn, make them show their true colors. Most agreed this made sense, though Chief Yusoke still grumbled about burning a perfectly fine building and the reconstruction costs. With majority agreement, Yahello announced they would proceed to set the finance pavilion ablaze. Young Am and all important documents were safely stored away. As flames engulfed the building, Yahello watched, noting it burned well, just like in his past life. But this time, he knew it was different. This fire was a stepping stone for the merchant group's success. He did feel a pang of sympathy for Chief Yusoke, who was dramatically lamenting his beloved, burning finance pavilion and wondering where he'd work now, deciding perhaps the chief deserved a small vacation. Yahello then inquired about the due date for the Lotus Courtesan House's fees. Yusoake confirmed it was next month on Buddha's birthday. Yahello decided they would let the issue marinate nicely until then, planning to secure the funds from elsewhere for the time being. A month later, at one of Hubei's 5 greatest escort pavilions, the Lotus Courtesan House, 2 men discussed the recent big fire at the Yunhe Merchant Group. One mentioned hearing all important contracts and records were burnt, while the other noted that all documents concerning the Lotus Courtesan House were kept in that very library, finding it strange given the large sum they owed Yunhe. The first man suspected they were using the fire as an excuse to avoid paying their debt. Nearby, the Lotus Courtesan House's chief manager, CEO Suchong, overheard and fumed silently, believing that trust was paramount in business and that the house master couldn't possibly see it that way. Determined to stop this, he approached the house master's chambers to offer greetings. Upon entering, he was shocked to find several entertainers lying on the floor, an unnerving sight that left him stammering. The Lotus Courtesan House master, Baek Bok, was casually drinking and asked Suchong dismissively what the issue was, wondering if he'd never seen a woman's body before. Suchong, appalled, reminded him that the former housemaster had banned such activities with the entertainers. Baek Bok waved a hand dismissively, telling him to cut the lecture, his expression turning menacing as he stated Suchong was making him want to kill him. Suchong despaired internally, thinking this crazy good-for-nothing was too much and that he needed to quit. Suchong broached the subject of the outstanding fees owed to the Yunhe Merchant Group. Baek Bok, however, seemed unconcerned, stating it was long past the due date, and if Yunhe had a problem, they would have said something. He then brusquely ordered Suchong to get out. Suchong stammered a protest, but Baek Bok reiterated his order, adding that Yunhe wasn't saying anything. Suchong, incensed, declared that the former housemaster would never have done such a thing. Baek Bok's expression hardened. He deceptively beckoned Suchong closer, then, searching around, grabbed a bottle and smashed it over the chief manager's head. As Suchong collapsed, gasping, Baek Bok stood over him, demanding to know who the housemaster was now, him or his father, before kicking him. He grumbled that all Suchong did was get in his way, then turned his attention to a trembling entertainer, telling her to listen or asking if she couldn't hear him, before announcing that once this was settled, they would deal with the Daonan Merchant Group. He acknowledged their requests could be annoying, but the Daonan Merchant Group was one of the 3 greatest merchant groups and a direct affiliate of the Murim Alliance, specifically the White Heaven Merchant Group. Baek Bok believed resolving this issue would silence comparisons to his father, and they wouldn't have to work with Yunhe anymore. Then, a sinister smile spread across his face as he corrected himself. No, they could completely eliminate Yunhe instead. The entertainer gasped in terror. Suddenly, a servant burst in, apologizing for the urgent intrusion, stating it was an emergency. Baek Bok, furious at the interruption, was informed that the Yunhe Merchant Group had arrived with all their guards. He was utterly dumbfounded. Outside the courtesan house, Yahello and his contingent stood before the doors. One of his men noted that no one was stopping them despite their unannounced arrival, to which Yahello drily commented that he wouldn't expect them to pay their guards well when they wouldn't even pay their business partners. He remarked that they were doing a great job at not running the place, and since they didn't seem ready to greet guests, he would just let himself in. With a decisive push, Yahello opened the doors, announcing with a cheerful, yet menacing, smile that they were here to collect their money. Yahello announced his arrival at the Lotus Courtesan House, proclaiming loudly that he was there to collect the money they owed. He strode in with a cheerful hum, a sight that made young Am, ever observant, wonder why her young master looked to be in such an uncharacteristically good mood for a debt collection. He dramatically burst into a room, playfully yelling peekaboo and demanding his money. His men exchanged glances. One mused that it was indeed about the money after all, while another seemed to question the possessive pronoun his. The housemaster, Baek Bok, lounging amidst disarray, demanded to know who the intruders were. Yahello's gaze fell upon an unconscious entertainer on the floor, before he calmly called for young Am. He then walked toward the seated Baek Bok, casually remarking that he had initially thought Baek Bok was merely someone who dodged debt, but it turned out he was a hopeless, good-for-nothing scumbag. Yahello then sarcastically wondered aloud if the late, Respected housemaster would be proud of such a successor, a comment that visibly angered Bekbok. In a flash of temper, Bekbok hurled his sword. As Young Am stepped forward, Bekbok lunged. One of Bekbok's own guards nervously tried to intervene, calling out to his master. Young Am, unimpressed, taunted Bekbok, suggesting that if he had drawn his sword, he should actually try to use it instead of just planning to chat. She then beckoned him forward with a dismissive tisk. Enraged, Bekbok lunged again, yelling he was a bastard. Young Am met his fury with calm skill, easily parrying his strikes. Bekbok grunted in frustration, while a small smirk played on Siaho's lips. The exchange continued, with Young Am deflecting every blow, eventually landing a hit that staggered Bekbok, sending him stumbling backward. He looked utterly astonished that he had blocked all his attacks. He recalled hearing that the Uni Merchant Group's second son was a first-rate martial master, but this guy. Siaho, seizing the moment, coolly asked if something wasn't going Bekbok's way. With a predatory grin, Siaho declared that if things weren't working out for Bekbok, then he clearly deserved a beating and launched himself into the air. Bekbok attempted a desperate kick, shouting for Siaho not to be so fast, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. Siaho simply advised him to clench his teeth. A sickening thud echoed as Siaho's attack landed squarely. Bekbok was sent flying, his sword clattering uselessly away before he crashed heavily. Siaho nonchalantly commented on the rather clear ringing sound the impact had made, cheekily asking if Bekbok's head was perhaps hollow. Young Am briefly wondered if he might be dead, but Siaho reassured her he hadn't hit him hard enough for that. One of Siaho's men, who looked suspiciously like the usually stern chief Yusuke letting off some steam, then roughly hauled the dazed Bekbok up by his hair. Bekbok groggily opened an eye, only to be met with the man's fierce glare. Yusuke snarled, asking if Bekbok was getting scared just by looking at his face and questioning if he dared stick a dagger into his chest. Siaho then stepped forward, ordering the scumbag Bekbok to look at him. He admonished Bekbok, stating this wasn't the first or second time he delayed payment for an entire year while annoying people, clarifying they had only tolerated it out of respect for the previous pavilion master, not because they were suckers. Bekbok, his face already swelling, blustered, asking what payment Siaho was even talking about. Siaho responded by contemptuously slapping several documents across Bekbok's face. These, Siaho explained, were records of all the goods the Uni Merchant Group had provided to the Lotus Courtesan House, noting that not a single coin had been paid in the last year. Addressing one of the trembling entertainers, Siaho pointed out that according to the contract, this non-payment meant ownership of the Lotus Courtesan House was to be transferred. Bekbok scoffed, calling it absurd and accusing them of using forged documents to pin this on him. He claimed to know all about the fire at Uni's finance hall, asserting it had destroyed all their records, and accused Siaho of trying to extort money without evidence. At this, Yusuke, looking thoroughly disgusted, muttered that he couldn't take this anymore and drew a knife. Siaho, ignoring Yusuke for the moment, questioned Bekbok's claim of fake documents before slamming his club down emphatically. He then held one of the documents up to an entertainer, asking if he was the only one who could see the clearly aged paper and worn-down seal. A wave of terror washed over Bekbok as he realized the document was genuine, his mind racing about magistrates and holy shit moments. This didn't make sense, he thought wildly. He'd heard everything went up in flames. Had the Uni Merchant Group messed up the arson? But no, they had assured him the job was done. Had they lied, and why? Siaho began to make a soft, rattling sound, prompting a confused Bekbok to ask what he was doing. Siaho replied with a condescending smirk that it was the sound of Bekbok's tiny brain trying to think. He then told Bekbok that if he had just run the Lotus Courtesan House properly, he could have lived comfortably, questioning what made him so desperate to pull such crap. With an intimidating glare that reflected Bekbok's terrified face, Siaho accused him of doing shady things behind people's backs, daring him to deny it. Just then, the beaten chief manager, Seo Suchong, struggled to speak, indicating he had something to say. Siaho looked over, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Suchong formally introduced himself as the chief manager of the Lotus Courtesan House, adding bitterly that he was a victim of internal workplace abuse. Xiaoho recalled that Suchong was the one who had turned a failing establishment into one of Hubei's top 3 courtesan houses with his exceptional managerial skills, a talent that had clearly been rotting away under Beckbok's mismanagement. Xiaoho offered a polite greeting, introducing himself, and Suchong bowed deeply in return. Suchong suggested they skip the formalities and presented a ledger, directing Xiaoho to the 7th page of the accounting books for the Lotus Courtesan House, mentioning a new branch location. Beckbok, seeing this, erupted in a furious scream, threatening to kill Chief Manager Xiao if he uttered another word, his face contorted in panicked rage. Before he could act, Young Am was suddenly behind him, a sword held menacingly to his throat, her expression utterly chilling. Beckbok screamed at Chief Manager Xiao, threatening to kill this son of a bitch if he spoke about that. His face was a mask of panicked fury, but Young Am's chilling presence and the cold steel at his throat quickly silenced him. Chief Manager Xiao, Suchong, then politely asked Xiaoho if he might speak with House Master Beck for a moment, to which Xiaoho agreed. Suchong calmly told Beckbok that it was all over and he should stop, leaving Beckbok to splutter in confusion. Suchong stated firmly that Beckbok had already crossed the line. He then explained that Beckbok, who possessed only average abilities compared to the previous, respected housemaster, was constantly making mistakes. Even his appearance resembled the former master, but his smarts were a completely different story, leading to constant comparisons with his father where even small mistakes were seen as big flaws. Perhaps that was why, Suchong mused, Beckbok had become so twisted. He recalled Beckbok's bitter resentment, his muttering about unintentional mistakes and the arrogant bastards always speaking of his father, and Suchang's own pointed question about whether Beckbok thought his father would always be in that position. Suchong had been left speechless. Now, addressing the defeated Beckbok, Suchong declared he regretted the time and effort wasted on their relationship, stating that Beckbok, even knowing he couldn't fill his father's shoes, would now have to deal with the consequences of his actions. Beckbok could only manage a paying grunt. As Suchong requested young master, checked the ledgers mentioned earlier. Xiaoho accepted the ledger, thanking him and noting internally that there must have been special circumstances for Suchang's actions. Regardless, things seemed to be resolved. As Xiaoho examined the ledger, he confirmed his suspicions. Beckbok was planning something corrupt, running an illegal gambling den. It was no wonder the brothel was a mess and their payments were delayed. His father, Gil sang, asking if Xiaoho had found anything. Xiaoho confirmed the funds were indeed leaking elsewhere. He then bowed respectfully to his father, thanking him for his trust. His father praised his good work, to which Xiaoho replied that since he started this business, he should naturally see it through to the end. Xiaoho mentioned another suspicious part he'd like to show his father, but his father stated he had info as well, correctly guessing Xiaoho was referring to the new pavilion house Master Beck was building. Xiaoho admitted he'd initially considered it a false rumor, but now saw it might be true, suspecting the mastermind behind it all was the Downend merchant group. Later, as Xiaoho, Suchong, and Young Am walked through a sun-dappled forest path, Xiaoho mused that he was aware the Downend merchant group was connected to the White Heaven merchant group, which was directly under the Murim Alliance. He wondered aloud what the Murim Alliance could be planning this time, which prompted Suchong to call out to the young master. Xiaoho, lost in thought, didn't immediately respond. Young Am, with a sharp look, asked what he could possibly be pondering so deeply that he hadn't responded to her calls. She then questioned why he had to see the new pavilion, requesting an explanation so she could be of help if something happened. Xiaoho, with a disarmingly innocent smile, admitted he wasn't sure why he was going, but he had to go find out, apologizing to Young Am. Suchong pointed out the pavilion house Master Beck was building, while Young Am internally debated whether she should just punch Xiaoho this one time for his evasiveness. Xiaoho observed that, contrary to his expectations, it was just an ordinary pavilion, though the air around it felt strangely cold. He asked young Am if she noticed anyone around. She confirmed she didn't, leading Siaho to conclude nobody must be nearby and they should go in. As they entered the seemingly deserted building, Su Chong explained no one was there because there was an order not to enter until tomorrow. He added that he had felt something strange near there before. Siaho instructed young Am to come behind him. Then, hand on his sword, he called out for whoever was hiding to come out. A soft footstep was heard, and a mysterious, cloaked and masked figure emerged from the shadows. Siaho, surprised they hadn't sensed anyone, demanded the figure identify themselves. The figure remained silent, but drew a sword, making Siaho wonder if they wanted to fight. He instructed young Am to take care of Chief Seo. The masked figure lunged at Siaho with incredible speed. Siaho, drawing his own sword, noted the attacker's quickness as their blades met in a flurry of sparks. The assassin's eyes, visible above the mask, narrowed as they continued their rapid exchange of blows, their swords clashing repeatedly. Siaho parried a strong strike, realizing that though light on her feet, this person was a master with powerful sword strikes. Suddenly, a faint scent of orchids reached him. Just as young Am cried out a warning to the young master, the assassin disengaged, sliding past them and landing lightly. With a swift movement, the assassin threw something, a small, round object that bounced across the floor. Siaho recognized it as a firebomb and yelled for everyone to get down. An explosion rocked the room. Amidst the smoke, Siaho asked if Chief Seo was okay. Su Chong, clutching his head, confirmed he was fine. Siaho realized it wasn't a firebomb, but a smoke bomb. The assassin's only goal had been to escape. He acknowledged they would have been in danger had she gone all out. Just then, Su Chong called out, "Over here," revealing a hidden trapdoor in the floor. He explained he didn't know why Beck had made it, but it was an underground tunnel leading to the Lotus Courtesan House's main building. Siaho found an underground tunnel hidden beneath the floor definitely strange. He asked young Am to guard the entrance, which she confirmed. Siaho knelt by the trapdoor, suspecting the masked person was related to it. As he pried it open with a creak, he murmured that what his father had been saying was true. Revealed on the underside of the trapdoor was the Daonoon Merchant Group's crest. Within the main estate of the Yunhe Merchant Guild, specifically the Yunwall Pavilion, Un Gilsang summarized the situation. An underground tunnel connected to the Lotus Courtesan House, and Siaho had found the Daonoon Merchant Group's insignia there. Chief Yu Soake, ever the pragmatist, adjusted his glasses with a weary sigh. Go Ilpyeong suggested that if the courtesan house bothered them that much, they should just put it up for sale. Siaho immediately protested, exclaiming that wouldn't do. His father and Go Ilpyeong looked at him, questioning why not. Siaho explained that the Lotus Courtesan House was one of Hubei Province's 5 major courtesan houses, frequented by wealthy elites and high officials. This meant it provided frequent opportunities to make contacts, earn favors, and quickly obtain high-quality information, not to mention promote their own merchandise. He added with a confident smile that if they retained the current chief manager, Su Chong, they wouldn't need to put much effort into management. It would run smoothly, making it a net gain in the long term, practically like duplicating money automatically. Go Ilpyeong agreed, stating that the ledger showed Su Chong possessed truly outstanding capabilities. Chief Yu Soake, with a disturbingly gleeful expression, admitted he wanted to bring Su Chong to his side and put him to work immediately. Su Chong, who was not present, suddenly felt a chill, wondering about its source. Siaho, seeing Yu Soake's dangerous-looking face, nervously agreed. Un Gilsang then decided that since Siaho had wrapped up the situation well, he would grant him a vacation as a reward, acknowledging he'd had a hard time with the Finance Pavilion incident too, and should rest comfortably for a few days. Chief Yu Soake, however, looked like he was about to have an aneurysm, his eyes practically glowing with the internal chant of "refuse him," muttering about the workload. Un Gilsang, noticing this, told Siaho he would handle Chief Yu, and Siaho could go. Siaho quickly agreed and made his escape, with his father and Yusuke comically trying to grab him as he fled, a skull-shaped speech bubble full of, "Where do you think you're going?" following him. Outside, Siaho shivered, remarking that Yusuke had given him the chills, almost like seeing the ghost of the man who died from overwork in his past life. Young Am, overhearing, asked if there was a ghost in the Yunwall Pavilion. Siaho quickly dismissed it and urged her to go, while Young Am wondered about all the ghost talk. Siaho internally mused that the reason the nobles of Hubei supported the Murim Alliance and the White Heaven Merchant Group in his past life must have been because they were extorted in secret at that hidden location. And now, that place was their merchant group's property. He cackled internally about pulling one over on those Murim Alliance bastards, which made Young Am think he might have gone crazy after seeing a ghost. Siaho then sobered, regretting they hadn't captured the masked assassin, as they could have learned more. He instructed Young Am to keep what happened at the hidden pavilion a secret from his father to avoid worrying him. He reflected that the masked assassin was a martial master incomparable to someone like Beck Bach, and if they ever confronted the Murim Alliance head-on, they would likely face even more powerful foes. He then decided he should visit his master from his past life, perhaps that very day, a thought that left Young Am looking puzzled. A memory surfaced, his master, a weathered man, lamenting that if only he had rushed the patrol by just 2 more hours that day, his son wouldn't have died. Siaho's expression became determined. He abruptly asked Young Am what day it was. Upon her reply, he cursed, realizing with a jolt that it was today. He immediately broke into a run, with Young Am and a physician following through a bamboo forest. He couldn't be late. He knew that today his master's firstborn son would lose his life in an accident in this very bamboo forest. He called out to Young Am, telling her he was heading there first and to take care of the physician for him, remembering it as a tragedy that happened while all the adults were away at work. Young Am acknowledged his order. Siaho recalled vividly how no one could have expected that the eldest son, while playing with his younger brother in the bamboo grove, would fall and be fatally pierced by a bamboo shoot, his younger brother crying out for him. He pushed himself harder, racing through the forest, the tall bamboo shoots towering above. He arrived to find the younger son, Hyunjin, kneeling beside his injured older brother, desperately wondering what to do, pleading for help from anyone, his cries echoing through the grove. As Siaho approached, he heard the boy's desperate pleas. Hyunjin was sobbing, blaming himself for suggesting they play in the forest. Siaho gently placed a hand on the boy's head, telling him it wasn't his fault. He explained that it was because Hyunjin had shouted for help that he was able to come. He praised the sobbing boy, telling him he did well. Young Am then arrived. Siaho gently pulled Hyunjin into an embrace, comforting him. He felt a wave of relief. Thank goodness. At the Uni Merchant Group's medical pavilion, the physician reported it was a penetration wound from a bamboo shoot and could have been fatal if they'd arrived even a little later. Siaho watched over the recovering boy and his sleeping younger brother. He thought that perhaps in this life, he might get to see his master smile a little more often. The pain of burying one's child was something he could never dare to imagine. So, he resolved they would change the future one piece at a time. He mused that it should be about time his master arrived. Just then, a man burst into the room, frantically calling for Hyunjin, his older son. Siaho recognized him as his master, who had just returned from an escort mission. The man, exhausted, greeted Siaho. Siaho introduced himself, explaining that while walking through the bamboo forest, he was fortunate to find his son and bring him back. The master, overcome with emotion, thanked Siaho profusely, saying it would have been a disaster without him. Siaho humbly replied that it was nothing. He was just lucky to find him. He then gave credit to the younger son, Hyunjin, explaining that he had stayed by his brother's side and stopped the bleeding, saving his life. The master gently stroked his sleeping younger son's head, a look of profound gratitude on his face. He bowed deeply to Siaho, saying he was so humble and he truly didn't know how to repay this kindness. Siaho, flustered by the master's unexpected display of gratitude, stammered that he shouldn't worry. The boy was meant to live, and there was no need for such thanks. The master's intense gratitude was almost too much. The master then looked at Siaho with a serious expression, asking if they could move somewhere more private. Siaho, slightly bewildered, asked if something was the matter. The master stood silently for a moment, then stated that this wasn't quite the place to say it, and they ought to be cautious. His next words sent a jolt through Siaho. It concerns your physical constitution. Later, under the light of the full moon in a quiet forest, the master apologized for summoning Siaho so late and without a guard, but Siaho assured him it was fine. Siaho astutely surmised that the master wished for their conversation to remain private, a deduction the master acknowledged with a slight smile, calling him smart. Siaho, internally, pondered if the pure, icy snow plum was the cause of the changes in his body, then voiced his question, asking if the master had sensed something and, more directly, if he knew about the mysterious dragon star physique. After a brief, loaded silence from both, the master, with a knowing smile, confirmed that he did indeed know, a small laugh escaping him. Siaho, trying to ease any tension, told him not to be nervous. The master explained that when he had touched Siaho's hand earlier, he felt an immense energy, something he recognized due to his own training in ice arts. He had sensed then that Siaho possessed the mysterious dragon star physique. Siaho then inquired if the master possessed further knowledge about it. The master affirmed, stating he had encountered someone with that physique in the past, which surprised Siaho. However, the master apologized, unable to reveal the person's identity, and Siaho, understanding, accepted that he must have his reasons. The master then revealed why he had brought up the topic. He wished to offer to teach Siaho the ice arts he knew. Siaho feigned a dramatic gasp, though he had anticipated this very offer. The master continued, explaining that Siaho saving his child, their meeting, and his awareness of Siaho's unique physique felt like an act of fate. He expressed his desire to repay Siaho for his son's life and earnestly pleaded to be allowed to teach him. Internally, Siaho found it difficult to suppress a smile, almost apologizing to his master for how smoothly his plans were unfolding. With a respectful bow, Siaho formally accepted the offer, asking the master to teach him. The master seemed taken aback by how readily Siaho agreed. Siaho explained that the Uni Merchant Group had a long and respected history with a prosperous escort agency, making it an honor he wouldn't refuse. The master, pleased, declared that training would commence the very next morning. The following morning, they sat together as the master introduced the cultivation technique, the supreme ice sea divine arts. He noted that since Siaho already possessed internal energy in his dantian, he merely needed to memorize the flow being demonstrated and then replicated. As the master guided Siaho's energy, a vibrant blue aura enveloped him. Suddenly, the master paused, a look of confusion on his face. He realized Siaho's meridians were already open, and he withdrew his hand. Addressing him as young master, he asked if Siaho was already familiar with this cultivation technique. Siaho feigned surprise, denying it, though he internally chided himself for forgetting his meridians had been opened by the plum. The master then inquired if there had been a time when Siaho's life was in danger due to his energy. Siaho admitted, somewhat truthfully, that he had consumed a miracle medicine a while ago which had nearly killed him, recalling the genuine struggle. Ah, that explains it, the master mused, likening Siaho's experience to an ancient tale of ancestors whose survival instincts awakened their latent abilities when they faced freezing to death. Siaho thought to himself that the actual truth would be far too unbelievable for the master to accept, simply replying yes when the master addressed him. The master smiled, deeming it a good thing that Siaho was already prepared to utilize the cultivation technique. This meant they could skip directly to stamina and strength training, starting immediately, which caught Siaho off guard. The master, with a stern glint in his eye, confirmed, promising to train Siaho so rigorously he'd want to curse him out, a prospect that made Siaho's face contort comically. The master was entirely serious, however, stating that since Siaho saved his son's life, he would do his utmost so his teachings could, in turn, help Siaho save his own. Thus began an endless cycle of studying documents at his desk, performing strenuous physical training like carrying heavy water barrels, which visibly sculpted his physique, and then more work. The master even assigned him homework, ensuring he trained even while working, much to Siaho's silent dismay. Siaho privately fantasized about his upcoming vacation, planning to do absolutely nothing but lie in bed. Just then, a door slid open, and Young announced to Chief Yu, Soake, that he had a guest. Soake, initially furious at the interruption, demanded if she couldn't see he was busy. Upon hearing it was Mr. Song, however, Soake's demeanor shifted instantly, and he prepared to leave. When Siaho asked if he should accompany him, Soake confirmed, telling him to get ready. Soake explained that a visit from Mr. Song inevitably meant discussions and, more importantly, additional documents. Already overburdened, Soake declared that Siaho would handle the paperwork for this matter, reasoning that explaining everything to Siaho afterwards would be a waste of time, a real pain, and totally inefficient. He quickly corrected. Siaho internally grumbled, recognizing Soake was merely being lazy and trying to escape the extra work himself. As Soake departed, he instructed Young to take good care of the young master, promising her even more work upon his return, a declaration that brought a disturbingly thrilled expression to Young's face. The next moment, Siaho found himself being enthusiastically and somewhat suggestively tied up by Young, who chirped, "Yes, Chief," as Siaho yelped in protest, thinking this was 50 shades of paperwork he hadn't signed up for. They soon met with Mr. Song, who greeted Chief Yu, remarking it had been a long time. Mr. Song Jiangju, identified as a landowner from Hubei Chongyang County, acknowledged the greeting but indicated he had something to discuss. Noticing the bound and gagged Siaho, Mr. Song inquired about him, to which Chief Yu stammered that Siaho was merely his SL subordinate, a slip that made Siaho inwardly question if slave was the intended word. Mr. Song took a sip of tea before Chief Yu prompted him, asking if there was a problem. Mr. Song explained that a few days prior, officials had informed him that some of his land hadn't been accounted for regarding taxes. After consulting a trusted individual, he learned the officers were apparently looking for something specific on his property. Believing it to be a misunderstanding, Mr. Song hoped that if he could find what they were searching for, he could meet with them and clear things up. He then revealed that what he was looking for was a doll that dances on its own at specific times. Siaho, still captive, reacted with wide-eyed shock to this bizarre request. Chief Yu mused aloud about a self-dancing doll, then firmly placed his cup down. He assured Lord Song he understood his predicament. Mr. Song looked a little anxious. Chief Yu then pointedly asked if official Pajiangsa was truly the one who requested this item, making Mr. Song visibly flinch. After a tense pause, Mr. Song admitted the truth. The matter involved Lady Ju. Chief Yu cleared his throat, then regretfully informed Lord Song that they couldn't take on this request, which visibly dismayed the landowner. Siaho, captive, mentally noted the name Lady Ju. It was explained that a game had become popular among noble women. They would assign tasks like bringing back a golden flower to obtain rare items. The loser of these bets had to host an extravagant feast, while the winner was treated like royalty until the next game. One woman, it was narrated, had created and hosted this game. She was Lady Ju, the wife of official Pajiangsa, depicted with a sinister air. What started as simple entertainment, with ladies admiring Lady Ju's possessions, escalated into a frenzied competition that even caused harm to commoners. Mr. Song confessed he hadn't understood their obsession with such trivialities back then. But now, with a pained expression, he felt he understood a little, exclaiming he had been truly wronged. Beside his tearful wife, he swore he'd never done anything shameful, yet was accused of tax evasion. He desperately believed that obtaining the rare item would allow him to appeal to official Pajiangsa and clear his name, begging for their help. Listening, Siaho pondered if Lady Ju was the hidden cause behind the ruin of many landowners in his past life, including Lord Song, due to tax evasion that sometimes led to suicide. He knew Lord Song was a long time, respected acquaintance of their merchant group. Helping him would surely be repaid. However, Siaho also recognized that getting entangled with Lady Ju at this moment was far too dangerous. Lord Song looked utterly dejected as Chief Yu offered a silent, consoling gesture. Internally, Siaho scoffed at his own caution, remembering the tragic end his family faced and questioning his resolve since returning to the past. Bound to the chair, he thought of his father and silently vowed never to forget his purpose. Suddenly, with a surprising burst of effort, Siaho snapped his ropes, much to the astonishment of Chief Yu and Young, who blurted out, "Wasn't he a slave?" Remembering the chief's earlier Freudian slip. Siaho then stood before a dabbing Mr. Song, announcing he had something important to report. With a confident smile, Siaho declared he would attempt to retrieve that rare item. Later, under a cloudy sky, Siaho explained that the item Lord Song mentioned was actually called the self-dancing doll. He recalled from his past life that the artisan who made it hailed from the Golden Immortal Village in Jiangxi Province, and if he made inquiries, he might be able to track him down. The most crucial part of his plan, however, was to avoid any direct conflict with Lady Ju. Siaho knew that soon the emperor would issue a decree putting an end to the noble women's frivolous game. When that decree came, Lady Ju's misdeeds would also be brought to an end for good. As long as he remained out of her sight until then, he reasoned he would be fine. "Young master," Young Am's voice cut in. Siaho looked startled by her sudden address. Young Am, radiating an almost demonic aura, intensely requested that whenever he planned to go somewhere, he inform her in advance, questioning his unannounced trip to Jiangxi Province with the implied threat of reporting him to the Labor Department. Their caravan proceeded along a treacherous, snow-covered road. Siaho defensively explained that it was time he began making trade expeditions, and this particular commission was very important for the Uni merchant group. He added that his father and the others had already given their approval, even mentioning his older brothers had given him gifts and wish him well, gesturing with a new dagger, which made Young Am sigh and tell him to put the dangerous weapon away. Young Am still looked unconvinced. Pal Gap, however, was grinning from ear to ear, both nervous and excited, remarking that it was young Master Siaho's first official expedition and how much he had grown. Another man, Lim Jiangbin, reassured warrior Yeo, Young Am, not to worry. Jiangbin, identified as a finance pavilion warrior, vouched for Siaho, stating he was far more mature and capable than his age suggested. He pledged to assist the young master so the mission would be completed swiftly and with grace. Lim Jiangbin then added, with a slightly mischievous grin, that even Chief Yu had said that the base. He quickly corrected himself, saying the chief had ordered the young master be returned as quickly as possible. Young Am dryly commented on the chief's good advice, and Siaho internally noted that not even she was buying it. Jiang Bin continued, mentioning that the expedition was accompanied by head escort Guak of the Prosperous Escort Agency and Captain Yung Chung from the Silver Wind Squad, so there was no need to worry, unless, he added with sudden nervousness, they ran into bandits or something, just as the carriage lurched violently, making him yelp. Siaho, with a deadpan expression, wondered if Jiangbin had just jinxed their entire trip. Stepping out of the carriage, he asked if something was wrong, looking around quizzically. Indeed, a group of imposing, rough-looking men blocked their path. One, heavily scarred, remarked with a smile that it had been a while. This was Guak Myung-hyun, the head escort of the Prosperous Escort Agency, Siaho's master, accompanied by Yung Chung of the Silver Wind Squad, who inquired if they had been well. Guak Myung-hyun observed their direction, correctly deducing they were bound for Jiangxi Province. Yung Chung affirmed this, explaining they were transporting goods that needed to be kept dry, and the heavy snow had slowed their pace, leaving everyone exhausted. Siaho commented that their slower pace was actually good news for his group. Guak Myung-hyun then stated that their stronghold chief had sent word, inviting Siaho's party to stop by for some warm tea and rest. The two escorts exchanged a knowing look, observed by Siaho. The Green Forest Bandits. Siaho thought to himself. He realized that in this particular area, such an encounter meant that that person must be nearby, just as a large, fortified bandit stronghold came into view. Siaho noted the Green Forest group's presence, deducing that given their stronghold's location, that man must be nearby. Inside, a boisterous group feasted around a long table, where a red-haired, eye-patched man laughed heartily, welcoming them. This man introduced himself as Jang Dae-soo, chief of the Wutong Mountain Stronghold, also known as the Wolf Fong Sword Demon. Young Chung then identified himself as a captain from Yunhee's Silver Wind Squad, and Gwak Myung-hyun stated he was head of the Prosperous Escort Agency. Jang Dae-soo explained he'd invited them due to the harsh weather, thanking them for their prompt arrival. Young Chung reciprocated the thanks, admitting they were desperate for rest. Siaho silently observed that Jang Dae-soo remained a surprisingly decent person, hardly fitting the image of a bandit leader. Dae-soo, relieved, urged them to eat before the food and tea grew cold. Lim Jiangbin nervously whispered to Young Am, questioning the relaxed atmosphere in a bandit's den. Siaho calmly explained to them that not all bandits or pirates immediately resorted to conflict with merchant groups or escort agencies. He added with a soft chuckle that, in his experience, those who initiated fights without a solid plan usually met a swift and unpleasant end. Pal Gap, ever enthusiastic, declared their young master a complete expert. Young Am, however, gave Siaho a skeptical look. She pointedly asked why he spoke as if he had personal experience when this was supposedly his first such journey, as Siaho took a sip of tea. Siaho quickly changed the subject, claiming his brothers had shared that super great tip and hurried everyone to eat, though Young Am remained unconvinced. Siaho took another sip, remarking on the surprisingly good quality of the tea, noting it must be quite expensive, especially in winter. With a casual shift in demeanor, Siaho commented to Jang Dae-soo that he didn't seem the type to be on such an arduous trip, referring to Siaho's own presence. Feigning a lapse in manners, Siaho then introduced himself as Eun Siaho from the Yunhee Merchant Group's Finance Pavilion. Hearing the name Eun, Jang Dae-soo inquired about Siaho's connection to the head of the Yunhee Merchant Group. Siaho confirmed with a smile that the head was his father. Jang Dae-soo erupted in laughter, exclaiming that explained Siaho's bright gaze and that he hadn't realized he was hosting such an important guest, pressing him to eat. Siaho politely took his seat, his eyes keenly observing the surroundings. He noticed that Gwak Myung-hyun, looking unusually serious, even gulping nervously. Siaho himself began to ponder the situation, noting that the bandits spread for their guests, while generous, seemed somewhat lacking compared to their usual fare. He doubted Jang Dae-soo would neglect his own people for guests, questioning if a stronghold of this size truly lacked funds. Something felt strange to Siaho as he picked at his food beside Young Am. He mused that when in difficult situations, they would invite guests and treat them very generously, even if the hosts themselves ate little. He deduced they intended to demand a higher toll, but wished to avoid aggression, all while maintaining an appearance of prosperity. A thoughtful expression crossed Siaho's face. Dae-soo probably didn't know what treasure lay hidden on this mountain, and if played correctly, this could be advantageous. Addressing the drinking stronghold chief Jang, Siaho casually asked if he had been experiencing hard times lately, a question that caused Young Am to dramatically spit out her drink and choke in surprise. Jang Dae-soo addressed Siaho as Young Master Eun, his voice hardening as he stated that while he believed Siaho spoke from ignorance, his words were incredibly insulting to their stronghold, a palpable menace emanating from him. Siaho offered a placid apology if feelings were hurt, but then smoothly told Dae-soo not to react so strongly, leaving the bandit chief momentarily stunned. Siaho continued, suggesting the stronghold didn't need to lavishly entertain passers-by in a manner unfitting their difficult circumstances, which sent Young Am and Jiangbin into a silent, shared panic attack. He then directly stated their intention was to request a higher toll than usual, a revelation that visibly shocked Young Chung and Gwak Myung-hyun with its accuracy. Siaho further pointed out that while the bandits acted as if they were eating their fill, their portions were noticeably smaller. Jiang Desu summarized Xiaoho's accusation. They were serving food to justify a higher toll, and his men were feigning abundance. Xiaoho calmly met his gaze, asking if he was wrong. With a sudden, sharp movement, Jiang Desu slammed his dagger into the table and rose to his feet. Guak Myung-yun and Yung Chung tensed immediately. A fearsome aura enveloped Jiang Desu as he glared down at Xiaoho. Young Am and Lim Zhongbin exchanged horrified glances, Zhongbin mentally bidding farewell to his mother, convinced Xiaoho had finally lost it and this was the end. "I'll see you in my next life, Mom," he thought with grim resignation. Then a grin spread across Jiang Desu's face, and he burst into uproarious, head-clutching laughter, the sound echoing through the hall, leaving Yung Chung and Lim Zhongbin utterly bewildered. Guak Myung-hyun and Xiaoho simply watched. Wiping a tear from his eye, Jiang Desu apologized for his mediocre acting. His men confirmed that Xiaoho was completely correct. Jiang Desu explained that the harsh winter had indeed made it a difficult year for their stronghold, clenching his fist in acknowledgement of Xiaoho's boldness in broaching the sensitive topic. He astutely deduced that young Master Un must have some kind of countermeasure in mind. Xiaoho internally conceded that Desu was remarkably magnanimous for a bandit leader, recalling he never figured him for a lifelong bandit even in his past life. Jiang Desu confirmed his interest. Xiaoho smiled, stating his method was quite simple yet effective. Intrigued, Jiang Desu leaned forward, asking what this confident method might be, while Xiaoho mentally prepared to shake things up. Before revealing his plan, Xiaoho gestured to a nearby sword, asking Stronghold Chief Jiang if it was his, remarking on its excellent condition. Desu affirmed, stating that for a martial artist, a sword is like a part of their body, and its consistent care is fundamental. He then questioned how this related to Xiaoho's proposed method, just as Xiaoho reached out and gently touched his chin. Xiaoho then posed a question. Wasn't Wudong Mountain itself more important to Desu than even that sword? Desu, taken aback, declared that Wudong Mountain was his everything, questioning how Xiaoho could even ask such a thing. Then why haven't you been taking care of it? Xiaoho pressed, precisely as Young Am, having reached her limit with the day's shenanigans, seemed to spontaneously combust with rage, yelling at those bastards to stop it, while a frantic Lim Zhongbin tried to douse her flames. Jiang Desu, utterly confused by the turn of events, asked what Xiaoho meant by taking care. Xiaoho simply gestured towards the window, stating, "The snow." He elaborated that because of the snow, fewer people were traveling, which was why their toll collection had suffered, a fact that brought grim expressions to Guak Myung-hyun and Yung Chung. Jiang Desu admitted that even their large group had barely managed the journey, implying smaller groups wouldn't even attempt it. Xiaoho then laid out his simple yet brilliant plan. If Desu cleared the snow from the paths, it would benefit travelers by providing a shorter route, and in turn, Desu would receive more tolls. A win-win situation for everyone. Desu, his one visible eye widening, stammered that they could even justify charging a higher toll for the cleared roads, an idea he hadn't considered. One of Desu's men blurted out that he'd never thought of clearing snow, conceding that educated bastards were indeed smarter, prompting another to sharply question if he'd just insulted the young master. Other bandits shushed him, fearing their chief's reaction, while Young Am and Jiangbin were still recovering from their earlier chaos, with Desu muttering about those bastards under his breath. Jiang Desu thoughtfully addressed young Master Un. He confessed his embarrassment at being unable to conceive such a simple solution and for his earlier impertinent behavior before understanding Xiaoho's intentions. He declared himself indebted to Xiaoho and asked if there was anything Xiaoho wished for. Xiaoho met his gaze, a slight, knowing smile playing on his lips as he thought, "This is it." He then leaned in and requested a private word with the Stronghold Chief. With a glint in his eye and a disturbingly eager grin, Xiaoho purred that he had something that would be very helpful for both the Wutong Mountain Stronghold and for them. Xiaoho expressed his admiration for the beautiful view from the mountaintop, overlooking the stronghold. Jang Daesu proudly stated it was the pride of their stronghold, explaining he established his camp there because he loved the scenery, especially in winter when snow made it breathtaking. Getting down to business, Daesu assumed Siaho's request for a private audience meant something important and urged him to get to the point. With a gentle smile, Siaho asked the chief how much he knew about spiritual herbs. Daesu admitted, not much, and questioned the sudden topic. Siaho began to narrate a memory from his past life, about 5 years before his death. He recalled that not long after, rumors of spiritual herbs sprouting in Wudong Mountain began to spread. Soon, the Murim alliance swept through Chief Jang's stronghold, quickly monopolizing the herbs. However, Siaho clarified that at this current point in time, the Murim alliance knew nothing of the herb's existence. Addressing the chief, Siaho revealed the truth. Precious spiritual herbs grew all over Wudong Mountain. He then pointed out a bluish flower beneath Daesu's right foot, startling the chief. This, Siaho explained, was a snow soul flower, an excellent remedy for damaged organs. He continued, mentioning other herbs like the white tiger spirit flower that expelled negative energy and snow ginseng that aided in medicine absorption. Countless spiritual herbs thrived on this mountain, Siaho declared with a sweeping gesture. Jang Daesu, stunned, demanded to know how Siaho obtained such information. Siaho smoothly replied that as a merchant handling various goods, basic knowledge of herbs and terrain reading was essential. Daesu chuckled, admitting that even for a merchant, spotting spiritual herbs so quickly was rare. Siaho, with a knowing smile, stated the details were a trade secret, cryptically adding he wasn't an average merchant, as he couldn't exactly say he knew the future, because that would be like admitting he knew the next winning lottery numbers. And who shares those? Daesu, acknowledging Siaho's guts, directly asked what he wanted from him. Siaho proposed an exclusive trade deal for the spiritual herbs, emphasizing the need to keep it secret. Daesu found the deal doable, but questioned the secrecy. Siaho explained that if word got out, the herbs would become a headache for both of them, potentially attracting competition from other trading groups. Daesu would then have to guard his land against thieves, a prospect he acknowledged, as the herbs were no ordinary treasures and outside interference could become a problem. He then grumbled about thieves who were the mask of justice and commit atrocities, a comment that made Siaho inwardly wonder if Daesu was referring to the Murim alliance, a slight flicker of surprise in his eyes. Siaho sweetened the deal, offering not only to purchase the herbs at a good price, but also to provide documents to help distinguish spiritual herbs from common weeds. Extending his hand, he formally asked if Daesu would accept their offer. Their hands clasped in agreement. Daesu, smiling, affirmed he would trade with the Uni merchant group. Siaho thanked him and suggested drawing up a contract, to which Daesu, with a slight chuckle, remarked on Siaho's thoroughness. Siaho replied with a confident smile that a contract was the foundation of any good deal. Returning to his quarters, Siaho was surprised by a sudden sound and an exclamation of "Wait!" as Palgap launched himself at him in an enthusiastic hug, crying out, "Young master!" His retainers had been worried because he'd been gone so long, prompting Siaho to mildly question the fuss. He reassured them he was fine and nothing had happened. Young Chung expressed his worry about Siaho going alone, even if it was at Siaho's request. Siaho, waving his hands dismissively, insisted he was all right, stating he wouldn't have requested a private audience if he sensed danger. Jang Daesu, observing the scene, remarked that everyone was fussing too much. He then declared that young Master Un was stronger than they thought, with top-tier skills even among those present, a statement that left Young Chung looking utterly perplexed. Jang Daesu then addressed his men, calling for their attention. He announced that starting that day, they would treat Un Siaho of the Yunhee merchant group with respect as an honored guest, instructing them to show him and his companions the utmost hospitality. Daesu added he wouldn't be the shameless person to charge a toll to someone who had essentially saved him, telling Siaho's party to go on through. However, Siaho stated he couldn't just walk away after what he'd received and called young Am, who presented a pouch. He told Dae-soo that if he was uncomfortable accepting it, he shouldn't consider it a toll fee, but rather a down payment for the deal they'd signed. Dae-soo, with a wry smile, conceded that Seo really had to win everything, then declared he would gladly accept it. The pouch was exchanged. Seo then announced their departure, as they were in a hurry. Jang Dae-soo mused to himself about the youngest son of Yoonhee, marveling at his boldness and cleverness despite his youth. Seo reminded him of an old friend. A flashback then showed Dae-soo, wounded and grief-stricken, amidst a burning stronghold, being urged by this friend to snap out of it and not die a pointless death. The friend vehemently told him not to dream of revenge, but to go into hiding, to conceal his martial arts, switch weapons, and above all, to survive. The younger, bloodied Dae-soo could only utter young master. Back in the present, Dae-soo reflected that meeting a young man as bold as his friend once was couldn't help but remind him of the past, as Seo's carriage departed. He recalled his friend telling him never to dream of revenge, but Dae-soo questioned how he could live in shame, abandoning his friend and their family. A wistful look crossed Dae-soo's face as he wondered just how far this young man, who reminded him so much of his lost friend, would go. Seo found himself in a void of light, his eyes snapping open with a jolt. He looked around, disoriented, wondering where he was. A questioning sound escaped him as his gaze fell upon shattered doll pieces on the floor. He muttered in confusion about the doll's presence. Then, sensing something, turned sharply. He saw the indistinct forms of a man and woman lying on the ground, and a child crying out for their mother and father. Seo approached the child, asking if they were okay. The child suddenly grabbed his robe with a surprisingly strong, glowing grip, pleading for him to save them this time, their face a mask of terror with bloodied, blank eyes. Seo screamed and jolted awake in his bed, PalGap rushing to his side, calling out, "Young master," and anxiously asking if he was all right. Young Am, standing nearby, looked down with concern, asking if he'd had a nightmare. Seo, patting a still-worried PalGap, dismissed it as just a rough dream. Internally, however, a sense of urgency gripped him. He had to find that child quickly, or else. Young Am perceptively commented that he'd been pushing himself too hard lately in his search for the artisan. Seo laughed it off, saying maybe. As PalGap helped him up, Young Am remarked that if they resolved this properly, there was much to gain. She then announced it was time to get going again for the day to find the doll artisan. It was now the third day since their arrival in Golden Immortal Village. Seo appreciated being able to move about freely thanks to his master and Captain Young-chun, but he still hadn't found the artisan. He knew the artisan lived in the village during this period and recalled a clue about him residing in a house with paulownia trees, which he'd initially thought would make the search easy. However, he soon discovered that this place, and even there, practically every house was filled with paulownia trees, a frustrating realization that made PalGap cry tears of joy over his candied fruit skewers, while Young Am looked on with mild exasperation. Seo sighed, figuring he'd have to keep looking. As they walked through the crowded marketplace, Seo's senses tingled. He muttered, "Here we go again," noticing they were being tailed by rival merchant groups, a fact PalGap, Midbite, also pointed out, noting they'd picked up a tail again, likely due to fears of Yoonhee infringing on their trade routes. Seo confirmed his observation. He found it a nuisance, as his hands were already full trying to find clues about the doll artisan. Deciding to deal with the pursuers first, Seo cheerfully asked PalGap if the marketplace wasn't full of interesting sights. PalGap enthusiastically agreed, marveling at the food and unique goods even after days of seeing them. Seo suggested they check out that area today, and Young Am, with a questioning look, agreed it sounded good. Seo and PalGap then took off running, with Young Am yelling after them to wait and that there was no need to run so suddenly, before exclaiming they should go together. After weaving through the market for some time to shake off their pursuers, Young Am, catching her breath, declared they had finally lost them. PalGap, surprised, asked if they were being followed, to which Siaho drily retorted why else he thought they suddenly took off. Palgap, realizing, asked if Siaho knew too, and Siaho confirmed it was obvious. Suddenly, a cry of thief pierced the air, and Siaho's attention snapped towards it. A man was seen fleeing with a pouch, pursued by another lamenting that his family would starve. The thief ran right past the seated trio. Siaho pondered the situation, then asked Palgap to borrow one of his candied apples, much to Palgap's surprise. Siaho recalled his training. The supreme En-IC divine arts was a technique that accumulated En energy most efficiently. His master had explained that once skilled, one could even imbue objects with En energy, demonstrating by coating his sword in an icy aura. Siaho focused, channeling his energy into the apple, though he noted internally that the amount of energy he could imbue was still quite small. But even this, he determined, should be enough, as he launched the frozen apple like a projectile, yelling "My apple," like trapping a Pokemon. The thief, grumbling about the persistent pursuer, suddenly tripped on the frozen apple before sprawling to the ground, the stolen pouch flying into the air as he yelped, wondering who left that on the ground, landing hard. He lay there dazed. Siaho, standing over him with young Am, demanded the return of the money pouch, while Palgap, looking down at the thief, declared him a bad person. The thief, terrified, quickly handed it over. Siaho thanked the original owner, who was still out of breath, and returned the pouch. Palgap then took charge of the subdued thief, saying they'd take him to the constables so the victim could go on his way. The grateful man then invited Siaho to his house for tea, feeling it would be terrible to let his benefactor go without showing proper gratitude. Siaho, with a warm, almost blindingly saintly smile, tried to decline, saying it was no big deal and he didn't need to be called a benefactor. The man, however, was so moved by Siaho's apparent humility that he enthusiastically insisted they go for tea. The man led them to his home, describing it as humble. As they approached, two small children peeked out and then ran out, joyfully yelling, "Father!" The man embraced them, asking his little rascals if they'd had fun. He introduced them as his children, urging them to say hello. Siaho greeted them, but then paused, a sudden realization dawning on him. He looked up, noticing the Polonia trees surrounding the house. One of the children looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Inside the artisan's humble dwelling, Siaho, with young Am standing vigilantly nearby, contemplated whether this man's child was truly the doll artisan he sought. Young Am, ever practical, suggested simply asking if the man knew how to make dolls. Siaho mused that a direct approach was often best, especially since the artisan's son, Gong Mil, bore an uncanny resemblance to the distressed child from his recurring dream. The door slid open, and the artisan, Gong Di, entered carrying a tray with tea. He apologized for the delay and for not having anything better to offer such esteemed guests as he served them. Siaho politely dismissed the apology, praising the tea's delightful aroma and thanking his host. Gong Di, placing the tray down, realized he hadn't properly introduced himself yet. He stated his name, Gong Di, a potter from the Golden Immortal Village, and expressed his gratitude once more for Siaho's earlier help in the market. Siaho, with a slight wave of his hand, tried to deflect the thanks, saying he'd only done what anyone should and that such profuse gratitude was making him feel embarrassed. Curious, Siaho inquired about the names of Gong Di's children. The artisan confirmed their names. His eldest son was Gong Mil, and his daughter was Gong Rei. It was then Siaho's turn to introduce himself as Un Siaho of Songyang County in Hubei Province, thanking Gong Di for his kind treatment, which left the artisan momentarily speechless. Gong Di expressed how humbling it was for someone of Siaho's apparent importance to show interest in simple people like his family. Siaho, however, modestly referred to himself as just a common merchant, insisting that Gong Di, as a father raising two children, was far more admirable. Siaho added that while he hadn't experienced fatherhood, he'd heard that raising children was as challenging as governing a nation. He sometimes felt managing his own retainers was a similar Herculean task. Gong Di sighed, agreeing it was no easy task, and often felt sorry for his children, knowing he lacked the ability to provide them with more. Siaho observed the bright and cheerful children. He remarked that seeing how happy they were, he believed Gong Dui had done plenty. Just then, Siaho's eye caught a small wooden cart nearby, and he paused. He asked if the children had made it. Gong Rei proudly announced that her brother, Mil, had made that one and many other toys too. Siaho recognized it as a self-moving cart. It was a bit rough compared to ones he'd seen in his past life, but it was a cart that moved on its own when its gears were turned. He remembered such toys were once popular among wealthy children. To think this boy, Gong Mil, had crafted one himself was impressive. If that was the case, then a thought struck Siaho. He praised the boy's impressive work and asked if he had made other things. Gong Rei enthusiastically confirmed, while Gong Mil remained shy. With a quick dash, Gong Rei returned, proudly presenting a wooden doll for Siaho to inspect. Just as I thought, Siaho inwardly exclaimed. The doll was rough compared to the intricate puppet he remembered, but it was an expected level of craftsmanship for an early stage. The entire room watched. Gong Rei then wondered aloud why this particular doll wasn't moving. Siaho surmised it was due to the lifespan of its internal materials. Gong Mil explained that turning the gear utilized the elastic force from a fish bladder inside, allowing the doll to move on its own. However, this one was made from discarded materials from a market, so it had likely broken down quickly. Siaho then asked Gong Mil directly if he could make the doll again, given proper materials. The boy nodded with a spark of confidence in his eyes. Gong Dui remarked that his son was indeed good at making such little things, but lamented that since those skills didn't bring in money, Mil mostly just entertained the neighborhood children and his younger sister with his creations. Doesn't bring in money, Siaho echoed, a knowing glint in his eye. He told Master Gong that his son's talent was a gift from the heavens, a skill that could indeed bring in great wealth. Gong Dui repeated the word wealth with disbelief. Siaho elaborated that the items Mil created were rare and unique. If refined and sold, they could fetch a high price. Gong Dui, however, expressed a resigned apology, stating that it was merchants who made money, not powerless artisans like himself who merely created the items. He sighed that artisans were often just used like the bear that does the tricks while the peddler takes the money. Siaho found the artisan's outlook more negative than he had anticipated, fearing that such passivity could lead the family to a tragic fate, possibly even enslavement. He clenched his fist, his mind made up. He had to change their destiny. Addressing Master Gong again, Siaho inquired about the share he received from selling his ceramics. Gong Dui estimated it was probably less than 10%. Siaho then made his offer. If Gong Dui allowed him to form a contract with Mil, he would give him 40% of the earnings, on the condition that they join the Yunhe Merchant Group's workshop. Gong Dui was visibly shocked, questioning why Siaho would offer his child so much. He started to ask about Siaho's merchant group, but then hesitated, stating he needed time to consider such a significant proposal. Siaho understood it was a lot to process right away. He agreed it was an important matter and encouraged Gong Dui to think it over carefully. Assuring him there was no need to rush, Siaho thanked him for the tea and said he would step back for now. He informed Gong Dui of his plans to return to Hubei in 2 or 3 days and that he would be staying at the inn until then. He invited Gong Dui to find him there once he had made up his mind. With his children by his side, Gong Dui agreed, Gong Rei waving a cheerful goodbye. As Siaho and his party prepared to leave, they headed out of the artisan's yard. Once they were away, young Am confirmed her suspicion that the boy was indeed the doll artisan Siaho had been searching for. She then questioned why Siaho looked so gloomy despite this success. Siaho explained his unease. Even if he wanted to help them, he lacked a truly justifiable reason to intervene so strongly at that moment, because, officially, nothing overtly terrible had actually happened to them yet. Meanwhile, at the imposing headquarters of the Hazeljia Merchant Group, a senior member was questioning a subordinate about his failure to retrieve Master Gong's monthly tribute. The subordinate apologized, blaming sheer bad luck for the mishap, explaining that the man he had tasked with the job ended up getting caught by the guards of Yunhee Merchant Group's third young master. Despite this setback, the subordinate assured his superior that he had already taken other measures, so there should be no further problems. The superior, an older, stern-looking man, then asked if they had figured out why that Yunhee brat, Siaho, had come all the way to their territory. The subordinate reported that they had been tracking Siaho for days, but he had merely been wandering around the village and marketplace. The superior mused that perhaps Siaho was just trying to gain fieldwork experience, but then sharply asked about Siaho's visit to Master Gong's house earlier that day. The subordinate quickly clarified that Master Gong had apparently insisted on treating Siaho to tea as a gesture of gratitude to his benefactor, dismissing the event as a mere coincidence and nothing to worry about. He confidently stated that soon they would have Master Gong sign the slave contract. The superior scoffed, calling Gong an arrogant bastard for daring to consider switching merchant groups and betraying them, especially after they had allowed him to earn a living all this time. The subordinate readily agreed, remarking that this was why lowly folks couldn't be trusted, and suggested that if Master Gong continued to resist, they should simply bring him to their headquarters. A cruel smirk spread across the superior's face as he declared they would teach Master Gong a painful lesson, ensuring he learned his place. Under the quiet moonlight, Gong Di's house stood still. Inside, as his children slept, his wife noticed his heavy sighs and asked their cause. Gong Di confessed he couldn't stop thinking about the man he met earlier, Siaho. His wife recalled him mentioning a gentleman who protected his pouch. Gong Di elaborated that Siaho recognized Mill's talent, even offering a contract that promised an astonishing 40% of the profits, while their children slumbered peacefully nearby. However, the more he considered such a generous offer, the more suspicious he became, lamenting his past experiences of being tricked, which made him feel pathetic for doubting even someone who had helped him. His wife, however, questioned if he was seriously believing what that con artist said. She reminded him that it was the Hazel Oak Merchant Group that had, supposedly, put food on their table until now, a point Gong Di found difficult to accept given their harsh treatment of him. He reminded her of their previous agreement to seek new work once his current contract ended, but his wife, looking away, claimed things were different now. She then dramatically revealed a gleaming gold ingot, explaining she had run into Huang Garyong of the Hazel Oak Merchant Group in a marketplace earlier. Huang, she said, had given it to her, suggesting they could repay it once their children were grown, and that selling it would keep them afloat for a while. With this, she painted Siaho as the suspicious one, questioning why anyone would offer commoners 40% of profits. If that wasn't a scam, she declared with a knowing smirk, what was? She concluded they couldn't entrust Mill to someone like that, looking at her sleeping son. Gong Di, holding the gold, remained deeply conflicted. Suddenly, a voice called from Master Gong from outside, making him wonder who could be visiting at such a late hour. Huang Garyong peered in, noting that Gong Di was still awake, nervously asked the reason for their visit. Huang, with false disappointment, stated he never thought Master Gong was that kind of person. Gong Di, seeing Huang accompanied by guards, including a mysterious long-haired man. He then furiously accused Gong Di of laying hands on the merchant group's property, leaving the artisan utterly bewildered. A dreadful realization dawned on Gong Di. As Huang's men advanced, Huang sneered that Gong Di, being awake, suggested he was planning to flee under the cover of night. Gong Di's wife, trembling, asked what he meant by fleeing. Huang then pointed accusingly at the gold ingot on the table, declaring it belonged to the Hazel Oak Merchant Group and demanding if Gong still planned to deny it with such clear evidence. The commotion woke Gong Mill, who called out for his mother. Gong Di's wife, attempting to clarify, apologized for her ignorance, but then asked Huang if he hadn't given her the ingot earlier for household expenses, a question that visibly shocked Huang. Huang leaned in menacingly, asking if she possessed a promissory note or a contract for borrowed funds, to which she could only stammer that it was her first time hearing of such things. Fed up, Huang declared a waste of time and ordered his men to drag the thieves out immediately. Gong Di and his wife were roughly seized, crying out for their children and demanding an explanation from Huang. Gong Mil, horrified, ran after his parents, screaming their names. Huang callously slapped the boy, then mockingly told him it was just a matter of signing a simple contract and that his parents would be back soon. But then Huang grabbed Gong Mil roughly. The boy, in a desperate act of defiance, bit Huang's arm fiercely. Howling in pain, Huang violently threw Gong Mil across the room, where the child crashed heavily. Huang then began to rant, declaring like parent, like child, calling them ignorant fools no different from beasts, and threatening to treat them as such. Just as Huang was about to continue his abuse, a sword suddenly appeared, stopping his foot. Huang looked up in shock, recognizing the long-haired man from his retinue. "Bi Baiang," he exclaimed, demanding to know what he was doing. Baiang stepped forward, his sword drawn. He approached the terrified children, his sword tip near the ground, and addressed Gong Mil. "Hey, kid." With his eyes glinting ominously, he asked if the situation sucked, then offered Gong Mil a dagger, telling him to take it. Baiang stated that in this world, nothing went one's way unless blood was shed, challenging Mil, if he was a man, to come at him ready to die. Gong Mil looked both terrified and resolute. As Baiang extended the dagger, the boy, overwhelmed, screamed and fled the house. Huang furiously questioned Baiang for letting the child go, but Baiang coolly replied that Huang had never mentioned anything about hurting children. Huang looked thoroughly annoyed. Baiang then smirked, stating that if Huang wanted him to do this dirty work, he'd need to pay extra, a true gig economy warrior. With that, Baiang departed, muttering that he only spent time in this countryside dump because it paid, though even that had been disappointing lately, he thought, sheathing his sword. He then leaped away with incredible speed, landing elsewhere, and wondered aloud if there was anyone strong enough around to entertain him. Back at the inn, Xiaoho was surprised to hear that Gong Mil had arrived. He questioned why the boy would be there alone at such an hour and asked for his whereabouts. Pal Gap then entered, carrying the sleeping and bruised Gong Rei, with a disheveled Gong Mil following, who managed a small greeting. Xiaoho, seeing Rei's injuries, was alarmed and asked what in the world had happened. He then noticed Mil was also injured and pressed for an explanation. With tears in his eyes, Mil began to recount the night's horrific events, while Xiaoho listened intently. Young Am and Pal Gap, hearing the story, looked on with expressions of shock and anger. Xiaoho clenched his fist, blaming himself for not having assigned a bodyguard to the family. Later, Gong Rei was seen energetically devouring a large chicken leg, much to Pal Gap's amazement as she tackled a second one. Xiaoho observed her, relieved that she seemed okay, while Pal Gap stammered that she was a very strong child. Young Am reported that Captain Young Chung had personally called for a physician, and Rei had received treatment first. Thankfully, her injuries were only minor abrasions, and she was fine. Mil, who had just returned from being tended to, was also fine. Young Am then mentioned that Mil had something important to tell Xiaoho, which Mil confirmed. The boy looked at Xiaoho and asked if it was true that he could make a lot of money with his talent. Clenching his small fists, Gong Mil then bowed deeply, desperately pleading with Xiaoho to save his parents, promising to work as hard as necessary and repay any cost, no matter how great. Xiaoho regarded the boy for a long moment, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He gently patted Mil's head. Then, his expression unreadable, he told Mil that he was sorry, but that was not possible. Mil looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief, and uttered a single, heartbroken pardon. With his hand gently patting Mil's head, Xiaoho repeated his apology, stating that saving his parents as the boy requested was not possible under those terms. Mil looked up, his eyes wide with confusion and a hint of despair, questioning the refusal. Xiaoho then clarified with a slight smile, explaining that Mil should be properly paid for his work. He wasn't some worthless leech to exploit free labor. He intended to make a proper contract, sharing the promised profit, but to do that, he needed parental consent, which naturally meant bringing them there. He then instructed Mill to stay and take care of Ray, assuring him he would be back soon with their parents, as Ray continued her meal in the background. Seo bowed slightly to Captain Young Chung, thanking him for looking after the children. The captain, with Ray still enthusiastically eating beside him, responded that knowing their situation, he couldn't just turn a blind eye, feeling it was his duty as a member of Yunhee. However, Captain Young Chung explained he couldn't spare many people to escort Seo, as today was their meeting with the Juhi merchant group, the original purpose of their mission. Seo reassured him that was fine, as they weren't going to fight, just talk with another merchant group. A simple conversation, he insisted. The captain, though still concerned, assigned 3 Silver Wind squad members to accompany Seo, urging caution, and then formally thanked the young master for his consideration. As Seo, flanked by Young Am and Palgap, prepared to depart, head escort Guak Myunghyun appeared, looking serious. Guak offered Seo a sword, hoping he wouldn't need it, but advising him to use it well if the situation arose. Seo, surprised since he hadn't been taught any sword techniques yet, accepted it with a thank you before taking his leave. Just as he turned, Guak used a frequency whispering technique to caution him about a martial master from the Hazel Oak merchant group known as Biao. Guak sternly reminded Seo that in the Murim, one must never let their guard down. With a final, almost gleeful glint in his eye that made Seo internally groan, Guak added that once Seo returned, they would continue his training that very night, so he should pace himself. Now, then, Seo muttered, opening the door to the Hazel Oak merchant group's main hall. With a determined stride, he led his small entourage, Young Am, Palgap, and the 3 Silver Wind members, into the building, announcing it was time to work, to which his men responded affirmatively. Inside, Huang Garyong was smugly asking Master Gong if he understood his dire situation. He accused Gong Di's wife of stealing a gold ingot worth 100 coins from the Hazel Oak merchant group, as Gong and his wife stood bound and guarded. Huang continued, explaining that their rules demanded 5 times that value in compensation, money he knew Gong Di didn't possess. Gong Di tried to interject, insisting they hadn't stolen anything, but Huang cut him off, telling him to stop being stubborn. Huang then slid a slave contract across the table, suggesting that if Gong signed it, they could pretend the whole incident never happened. Gong Di, aghast, questioned if Huang wasn't afraid of divine punishment, wondering how someone wearing a human face could act more despicably than a beast. In response, Huang viciously punched Gong Di across the face, declaring that his word was now law to Gong and that a slave-to-be shouldn't dare talk back to his master, continuing the assault while advising him to listen when spoken to kindly. Gong Di crumpled, bloodied, as his wife cried out in horror. The Hazel Oak merchant group's leader, who had been observing, tutored Huang, reminding him of their supposed agreement of no violence, then addressed Master Gong, suggesting they try to resolve things like civilized people before threatening to report the theft to the authorities. He painted a grim picture. Gong's wife and children would be sold off to some unknown, harsh place, asking if it wouldn't be better to simply work under him instead. Gong Di, dazed and defeated, stammered, realizing all this was because he had mentioned leaving for another merchant group at the end of the month. The leader sighed, feigning bewilderment and claiming he honestly didn't know what Gong was talking about anymore. If Gong was going to be difficult, the leader stated coldly, then they would just hand him over to the authorities. He then described, with a chilling relish, how once sold into slavery, Gong would learn his lesson through suffering, adding that many couldn't endure such a life and ended up taking their own lives. Judging by Gong's stubbornness, he callously mused, perhaps his children might hold out better, finally prompting a broken apology from the artisan. The leader then theatrically feigned poor hearing due to old age, to which Huang scoffed, "Old age, my foot." Huang then roared at Gong Di, demanding if he couldn't even apologize properly. At this, Gong Di slammed his head to the floor, kowtowing and screaming his apologies, admitting he acted without knowing his place. He cried out that he would sign the slave contract, or whatever it was, just begging them to spare his children, to forgive them. The leader, with a dismissive click of his tongue, ordered his men to let Gong go. Huang held out the contract, asking if it wouldn't have been so much easier if Gong had just done that from the start, adding that some people only understood when they were beaten. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed as the main doors burst violently inward, sending splinters flying and shocking everyone present. Xiaoho stood in the ruined doorway, 1 foot forward. Huang, momentarily stunned, muttered that some people, like the one who just arrived, only started listening after they'd been smacked around. Xiaoho, calmly holding the sword Guak had given him, stated he had honestly just wanted to talk today. But now that the door was broken and everything, he mused, they might as well do some beating while they were at it. He then hefted the scabbard sword, looking around the room, and coolly asked who wanted to get beat up first. Huang stared in disbelief. The leader, furious, demanded Huang identify the intruder, and Huang stammered that it was the youngest son of the Yunhe merchant group. "Ah, so you're him," the leader sneered, recognizing Xiaoho as the Yunhe brat who had been snooping around Golden Immortal Village. Xiaoho confirmed he knew he was being followed. Xiaoho then stated he knew all about the leader, not needing to follow him to learn it, which visibly startled the man. The leader blustered, calling Xiaoho an insolent little brat, but Xiaoho cut him off, labeling him as trash who tricked innocent people into signing slave contracts. A beast driven by greed who had abandoned his humanity, and also a petty coward who got scared the moment he heard Yunhe was coming and sent people to follow them. Xiaoho declared it was because of people like him that merchants got branded as swindlers, adding with a smirk that the leader's calm-looking beard actually helped. The leader trembled with uncontrollable rage. Xiaoho then turned to Young Am with a mischievous grin, asking what would happen if a man with a scruffy goatee like the leader's tried to confess his feelings to her. Young Am deadpanned that he'd be hit with a bamboo strike immediately, probably before he even finished his sentence. Enraged beyond words, the leader screamed for his men to capture that bastard right away. Masked guards drew their gleaming swords, poising for attack, and then charged towards Xiaoho as a group. Xiaoho calmly watched them approach, leaning on his sword. Before they could reach him, Young Am blurred into action, intercepting the first guard with a swift, decisive strike. She landed lightly, a slight smile on her face, remarking it had been a while since she'd stretched. She then became a whirlwind of motion, effortlessly punching and cutting down the guards, impressing Pal Gap, who could only utter woe as she moved with dazzling speed. With a final, powerful blow, Young Am dispatched the last of the attackers, announcing, "All done." The remaining Hazel Oak members, including the 2 Silver Wind escorts with Xiaoho, stared in stunned silence, one of them muttering about how strong she was, especially since Xiaoho had claimed they just came to talk. Xiaoho, still leaning casually on his sword, smiled pleasantly and asked if, now that the trash had been taken out, they could talk. The leader, panicking, shoved Huang Garyong forward, shouting for someone to stop Xiaoho, while Huang protested that he wasn't trained in martial arts. The leader then frantically looked around, cursing and wondering where the hell Baiyang was, exclaiming this was exactly why he'd hired him. As if summoned, a figure appeared in the doorway behind Xiaoho's group. "Looking for me?" Baiyang inquired. The leader of the Hazel Oak merchant group furiously demanded where Baiyang had been all this time, questioning if he wasn't going to earn his keep. Baiyang, with a dismissive glance at Xiaoho's party and the defeated guards, retorted that looking at the situation, it didn't seem like the leader could even pay the signing fee right away, prompting a stammered, "What did you just say?" from the enraged leader. With a smug grin, Baiyang proposed a change of terms. If the leader paid him 10 times the signing fee, he'd get him out of the mess right now. The leader, sputtering about what a trashy thug Baiyang was, reluctantly agreed. Baiyang, confirming the 10 times fee, drew his sword with a metallic ring, as Xiaoho watched intently. Xiaoho quickly warned his Silver Wind escorts to dodge. They barely managed to avoid Baiyang's swift, sweeping attack, The one cried out in pain as blood droplets flew. Baiyang then launched another powerful strike, his eyes glowing with a menacing red light. Xiaoho intercepted this attack, their swords clashing with a sharp clang. "How dare you?" Xiaoho growled through clenched teeth. Baiyang, with a smirk, taunted that Xiaoho could try buying him with money too. Meanwhile, the Hazel Oak leader nervously muttered to Huang, questioning if Baiyang could possibly lose to that brat. Huang reassured him that despite Baiyang's appearance, he was a real martial master who had become first-rate, and with his youth, he might even reach the peak realm one day if he encountered a fortuitous opportunity. The leader, unfamiliar with such rankings, asked how strong that was. Huang explained that countless martial artists trained their whole lives only to remain second-rate. Being first-rate meant one was more than qualified to lead a small sect, and if one reached the peak realm. Well, need he say more? Convinced, the leader laughed boisterously, ordering Baiyang to teach that arrogant punk the rules of the Jianghu. The two combatants disengaged after a fierce exchange. Baiyang asked if Xiaoho intended to buy him with money. Xiaoho, holding his sword with newfound confidence, replied that he didn't think he needed to. If all Baiyang was worth was money, then he could handle him just fine. Baiyang warned the spoiled noble kid to watch his mouth or he would seriously regret it, launching another attack that Xiaoho met head-on. Their blades clashed repeatedly, creating a flurry of sparks and powerful shockwaves. Baiyang, surprised, uttered a ho as one of his attacks was parried. Xiaoho pressed his advantage, landing a solid blow to Baiyang's midsection. They both leaped back, creating distance. Baiyang, impressed, admitted he initially thought Xiaoho was just some flailing brat, but acknowledged he had real skills. However, clutching his chest, he warned Xiaoho that the Jianghu wasn't so easy to survive in, before suddenly spitting a mouthful of liquid directly at Xiaoho's face. Xiaoho instinctively raised his arm to block, but the potent liquid still splashed him, causing him to cry out as his eyes burned. He wondered if it was fire liquor, his eyes stinging so badly he couldn't keep them open, and frantically tried to think of what to do in such a situation. Blinded and uncomfortable, a thought struck him. Wait, uncomfortable. He recalled his master Guak Myungian's words about the supreme En-I-C divine arts, a technique inspired by the fierce chill of the winter sea, its mysterious depth like that of an ocean. Guak had explained that the more one mastered it, the more discomfort they would feel when people with impure or dark energy, like those from the demonic cult or the dark faction, were nearby. Xiaoho had initially thought discomfort sounded like a bad thing, but Guak corrected him, stating it was a huge advantage, as killing intent couldn't be hidden from this energy detection. At a certain level, one could even perceive movements or position. Xiaoho lamented that in his past life, he never reached that level of sensitivity. Guak had further elaborated that at Xiaoho's then current level, he'd probably just feel uncomfortable, but once he reached the stage just before the peak realm, while still first-rate, he would start to read his opponent's movements and positions. Guak urged him not to slack off in his training, for one day, when on the edge of life and death, that finely honed energy detection would become a weapon greater than any blade. Closing his eyes, Xiaoho focused, a blue aura flaring around him. I can feel it now, he thought, albeit only a little. His senses heightened, the world around him appearing as flows of energy. This was because he had been training with all his strength every single day. He sensed Baiyang's attack from behind, a simple sword strike, and reacted. With a swift movement, he parried the blow with his arm, causing Baiyang to cry out in surprise and pain as his attack was not only blocked, but met with a counterforce. Xiaoho then spun, his speed almost too fast for Baiyang to follow. Baiyang, clutching his injured arm, demanded to know how Xiaoho knew he was going for his back, inwardly noting that Xiaoho's swordplay was incredibly basic for his level of internal energy. Xiaoho, wiping his eyes, cheekily replied, "Who knows? If you're that curious, maybe you should pay up as well. Information doesn't come for free, you know." Baiyang, infuriated, growled, "You little." Meanwhile, Palgap was struggling to tend to the 3 injured Silver Wind escorts, panicking as their bleeding wouldn't stop, while young M, with a sharp, "What do you think? Press harder," tried to direct him. Young M clicked her tongue, noting they were short on hands as one of the men coughed up blood. She glanced towards Gong Di and his wife, who were in full panic mode. Then her attention was drawn elsewhere. Huang Garyong was trying to usher the Hazel Oak leader towards the exit. Young Am, her patience clearly gone, fiercely ordered them to get over there and stop the injured from bleeding now. Huang and the leader, startled by her intensity, yelped, "Why yes, ma'am," and scurried to help. Baiyang, enraged, launched a wild, screaming attack at Xiaoho. Xiaoho calmly sidestepped the furious, yet sloppy, assault, then with a precise, almost casual swing of his scabbard sword, tripped Baiyang, sending him tumbling to the ground. Xiaoho stood over him, remarking it was time to wrap this up. Baiyang, looking up with a mixture of sweat and disbelief, thought how Xiaoho had been dodging all his attacks, as if predicting them. A slow, almost delighted grin spread across Baiyang's face. "It's been a long while since things have been fun for me," he declared. Baiyang suddenly tossed his sword aside, embedding it point first into the wooden floor, much to Xiaoho's confusion, who asked if he was giving up. Baiyang stated it was quite the opposite. The reason he used a sword was because he didn't want to stain his sex martial arts doing dirty work. He acknowledged Xiaoho's strength as the Yunhe young master and declared that from now on, he would face him seriously. Xiaoho, a slight smile playing on his lips, mused that this explained why a supposed first-rate martial master had such dull swordmanship. Now it all made sense. Young M then tossed the scabbard sword to Palgap, who fumbled to catch it, asking what she was doing. Xiaoho, facing Baiyang, formally introduced himself as Un Xiaoho of the Yunhe merchant group. Since Baiyang used fists and palms, Xiaoho announced he would face him with the martial arts he had learned as well. He reflected that in his previous life, martial arts were just a means to survive, recalling asking a senior to teach him something good. He had thought that wouldn't change, but Baiyang, looking almost eager, declared, "I like you. All right, I will teach you a lesson." Xiaoho knew that now. It was different. In this life, more than anything, he wanted to become far, far stronger than before, and launched himself at Baiyang. He deflected a kick, as Baiyang unleashed his homing twin Viper Strike. Xiaoho sidestepped, the attack missing by a hair's breadth. Baiyang, his earlier cocky attitude gone, now bore a scratch on his cheek, his clothes slightly torn. Xiaoho recognized that Baiyang's martial arts were the real deal. As Xiaoho and Baiyang traded blows, the true nature of their skills became apparent. One could only truly tell by fighting. Baiyang, despite his disheveled appearance, was confident in his superior combat prowess. Yet he found himself baffled by Xiaoho's ability to deflect all his strikes. He couldn't understand why he couldn't land a single hit. It wasn't that Xiaoho's vision was better, nor had Xiaoho learned his sex martial arts. Baiyang was utterly perplexed by how Xiaoho anticipated his moves. Xiaoho then landed a powerful blow, sending Baiyang reeling, who cursed in frustration. A memory flashed through Baiyang's mind. A flock of crows cawing overhead, a younger, emaciated version of himself wondering if he was going to die. A man had approached, noting the unnatural look in the boy's eyes. The man addressed him as a lost child, offering an escape from death by inviting him to come with him, his hand outstretched. This man, a benevolent-looking monk, had become his master. Another memory surfaced. Baiyang, older now, choking a terrified man who questioned his actions. Baiyang coldly stated his client had asked him to, then contemptuously dismissed the man's desperate offer to pay more. He had asked, "Well, how much can you give me?" His master had then intervened, smashing a nearby object and sternly reminding Baiyang not to use martial arts against the weak. The master had furiously ordered Baiyang to get out of his sight if he intended to continue down that path, to never appear before him again. Baiyang had casually replied not to worry, as he only came to say his goodbyes anyway. The master, coughing blood, had uttered, "You're..." Baiyang had retorted, "Hey, monk, I was born on the streets, and this is all I've learned. Is it so wrong to make a living with violence? The master, clutching his chest, called him a fool, declaring that Baiyang's martial arts had no value and no soul because his fists only acted upon greed, and prophesied that one day, Baiyang would understand what he meant. Then, a more recent memory, Baiyang surrounded by ruffians on a dark night, one taunting him for not knowing how scary the world could be because he'd always been the one beating people up. Another, brandishing a knife, sneered that even back-alley merchants without martial arts could fight back together. Baiyang, with a cold look, told them not to be too sad when they were in hell, as this was all just karma. The scene ended in a splash of blood, Baiyang standing amidst fallen bodies, his hand bloodied. His master's voice echoed again. I told you not to use martial arts against the weak. Baiyang then recalled picking up a small, discarded knife, his grip tightening around it. Ooh, impressive, he thought, looking at the blade. The Hazel Oak leader had approached him then, commenting that Huang had been getting on his nerves and that Baiyang had taken care of him, offering him a position. After a moment's silence, Baiyang had asked, How much can you give me? His driving desire. I wanted to live, and he wanted to live a life of wealth and power while he was at it. Snapping back to the present, Baiyang, with renewed ferocity and a desperate roar, declared he wouldn't die in a place like this. Xiaoho watched, his eyes narrowed, as Baiyang prepared a powerful attack. Xiaoho met it with his own technique, snake engulfing iron bird, a whirlwind of energy clashing against Baiyang's desperate assault. The two serpentine energy constructs collided fiercely. Xiaoho gritted his teeth against the force, then pushed back with a series of rapid strikes. Baiyang, a crazed grin on his face, thought, it went in. He lunged forward, screaming die, as his attack, shaped like a giant viper, descended upon Xiaoho. But Xiaoho, anticipating the move, stomped his foot, sending shards of ice shooting up from the ground. Baiyang, caught off guard, looked down in shock as the ice enveloped his legs. Xiaoho met his gaze. The master's words echoed in Baiyang's mind once more. Your martial arts have no value and no soul because your fists only act upon greed. Xiaoho then clasped Baiyang's outstretched hands, channeling his icy energy. One day, you will learn what I mean. The master's voice faded as Baiyang, his eyes wide with realization, thought, you were right. Xiaoho unleashed a final, devastating palm strike imbued with his supreme Ice Sea divine arts. Baiyang's thought trailed off. In the end, my fists were meaningless, as he recalled pouring water on a lonely gravestone. Xiaoho's attack sent Baiyang crashing to the ground, blood spewing from his mouth. Xiaoho stood over him, panting heavily, then let out a breath of relief. He then, with a surprisingly cheerful bow, thanked Baiyang for the lesson, which probably just confused the defeated man even more. Later, Gong Di expressed his profound gratitude, stating his family was greatly indebted to Xiaoho and the Yunhe merchant group, wondering how he could ever repay such a favor. Xiaoho dismissed his thanks, saying he did it for his own sake too, which puzzled Gong Di. Xiaoho explained that the Hazel Oak merchant group's evil history had ended the previous night. Their leader had initially denied his wrongdoings, but once Xiaoho showed the authorities the counterfeit gold Sai the leader possessed, he was silenced. It was a fake, clear as day, to Xiaoho. Xiaoho revealed he knew the leader was beheaded for using counterfeit currency in his past life, so he was certain the gold used for blackmailing couldn't be real. Thus, with the leader exposed and subsequently dealt with, the incident was resolved. As for Baiyang, he had disappeared amidst the chaos. Xiaoho modestly claimed he was just an ordinary merchant too, and that helping Gong Di also helped him, though he added he wasn't one to stand by when he saw injustice. A classic humble brag. Gong Di, unsure what he could offer in return, promised to do anything he could. Xiaoho, liking his attitude, then said, "Give me your son," before quickly correcting himself. "No, allow me to offer you a contract." Gong Di, momentarily confused by the near slip, then remembered the aforementioned contract. Xiaoho smiled smoothly. At a meal later, with Gong Mil looking up expectantly and Gong Ray still enthusiastically eating, Siaho called out to the boy. Waving goodbye to the family, Siaho cheerfully asked if they hadn't forgotten their promise. Gong Mil looked up with wide, hopeful eyes. Siaho gave him a reassuring smile. That night, under the full moon, at a lavishly lit building, an attendant was pouring wine for a beautiful woman relaxing in a bath. The woman sipped her drink and mused aloud, asking if Song Jiangju had indeed gone to the Yunhe merchant group. The attendant, whose face bore the marks of a recent beating, likely from Siaho's intervention with the Lotus Courtesan House assassin, confirmed this with a neutral expression. After the attendant relayed more information, Lady Ju hummed thoughtfully, a subtle smile playing on her lips as she considered this new development. "That's interesting," she murmured, dipping her leg into the steaming water. Somewhere, a cute piglet in a bath toy floated contentedly.